Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and this is a massive compilation video which contains every single take and everything that I've ever said on this channel when it comes to the pyramids in ancient Egypt, as well as information more at large when it comes to the Giza plateau. There will be a section on this video where we'll discuss how the pyramids were built and whether or not slaves were involved as a workforce. But we will begin the video by addressing these recent massive, enormous claims when it comes to what's underneath the pyramids. So allegedly the huge structures and in fact the vast city. This is of course in connection with the claims presented by the Italian researchers Armando May, Corrado Malanga and Filippo Biondi. This having to do with the scan method called synthetic aperture radar. This video is full of all sorts of information, including my own personal theory and explanations. Enjoy. And unless you live under a rock or 648 meters under the Pyramid of Khafra, you probably will have heard about this new phenomenal, glamorous discovery that has to do exactly with the underground buildings, even cities, entire cities that would have been found by scientists underneath the pyramids, such as Giza, in the Giza plateau. Is it real? Is it nonsense? Let's check it out. Now, of course, whenever we try to figure out whether something is correct, not, if it's fake news, if it's a conspiracy theory, if there is actual scientific evidence underneath it, if it's something that has some names beneath it, then the first thing we need to do, of course, is ditch all of the videos that talk about it, particularly on TikTok. If you heard this on TikTok, please stop believing TikTokers. Thank you. Thank you. And we should find the source of these claims. So, first, let's reveal the claim. Then we'll look for the source, the original paper, not someone mentioning it, because then it's a game of telephone. Original paper. Then we see who the scientists that are behind the claim. First of all, we need to see if the claim matches. Then we need to talk about whether or not the findings can be reproduced, because that's how you do science. But let's proceed in order. So the claim is the following, as we read in the Economic Times: Egypt's Giza pyramids mystery deepens. Radar finds underground structures twice as deep as the Eiffel Tower, stretching across 2 kilometers. As we approach the paper, which already I have found for you, of course, the first thing that I would like to underline about this is the word radar. We are talking about a specific type of technology that is mentioned here, SAR, which already can be a little bit of a problem if you know how usually this works in the realm of both geology, archaeology, and whatnot, but we'll get to that in a second. Scientists have discovered a large underground structure near the pyramids of Giza using radar technology. Researchers Corrado Malanga, first name, we got 3 names today, Corrado Malanga from the University of Pisa and Filippo Biondi from the University of this place, used synthetic aperture radar, SAR, to scan the area. Their findings reveal a network extending approximately 2 kilometers beneath all 3 pyramids. Now here's where the statement starts to become exceptional in theory. These structures contained multiple, so the structures underground contained multiple levels and were connected by geometric pathways. Beneath these pathways, 8 vertical cylindrical wells were discovered. Each well was surrounded by descending spiral pathways reaching depth of up to 648 meters. At the deepest level, the pathways connected to 2 massive cube-shaped structures, each measuring 80 meters per side. Now, let me find you a 3D visualization which they have offered. Okay, so these are the pyramids. This is a very sci-fi representation. Let's have a look at the one at the bottom right. So this would be what we will find in the original paper, this sort of images. There are already some problems with this, by the way, and I will underline them in a second, but this is what we're working with. This is what they recreated afterwards with the usage of 3D. Now, how they went from this to this is beyond me, but let's proceed in order. This is the pyramid. They find 5 structures inside this pyramid, which is very reasonable that we still haven't found everything inside the pyramids. But then this is the situation that we have just been told about. And in fact, there is more, because this picture doesn't even show it, because underneath these, there will be squares, 80 meters in diameter. Let me see if I can find those. There we go. So this you can see a little bit here underneath all of these things that now look very very sci-fi again, but then underneath we have got these squares. To save time, let's read the synopsis before we jump into the actual paper. So we are told that scientists have found a vast underground structure beneath the pyramids of Giza using advanced radar technology. The system has multiple levels of geometric pathways. These findings challenge the belief the pyramids were only royal tombs. The subterranean network may have had a mechanical or energy-related function. Researchers want to excavate further, but permission is uncertain. Right. Okay, so regardless of which article you find, oftentimes they tell you about these new pyramids, they drive conclusions, even when it comes to the pyramids being massive power plants or whatever the heck, which are all fascinating, by the way. They will connect it to the idea of ancient civilizations that were in fact advanced. Of course, some people connect it to alien civilizations. And I always say, when it comes to these theories, I find them fascinating. I could spend an entire day reading about this stuff, watching movies about this stuff, and I always like to leave a little bit of a window of possibility, but the size of that window is dependent on the evidence we have, and up to this point the evidence is not great, so the window is rather small. But if you start presenting more and more evidence, then I'm more than happy to start considering the possibility. With that being said, so I don't say absolutely never happened that no aliens, that any alien has ever visited us. Absolutely, it's not possible that there was an ancient, maybe still human, but an ancient, more advanced civilization that was destroyed. I'm not saying it's absolutely didn't happen, because I wasn't there. With that being said, at the moment, it's kind of small. Now, all these articles, unfortunately, do not link us to the paper, so I found the paper myself. This is the paper, MDPI. I'll leave a link in the description, and the title is Synthetic Aperture Radar Doppler Tomography Reveals Details of Undiscovered High-Resolution Internal Structure of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And as we read, Corrado Malanga, Filippo Biondi, and there are a few other editors that we can see here. I would like to underline now, before we deepen this, is that I don't know anything about Filippo Biondi. I even clicked it to try and see, because of course one way to try and figure out the validity of a statement not only is to look at the paper, which of course I did, and we're going to read some of it together, but it's also try to see, okay, but who wrote it? I couldn't find a lot about him, so if you do know more about Dr. Filippo Biondi, please let me know. Here it says Università degli Studi dell'Aquila, so University of the Studies of Aquila, which is a city in Italy. But when it comes to Mr. Corrado Malanga, I have to disclose at this point that he is a former researcher from the University of Pisa when it comes to, I think it was organic chemistry, but he is also in Italy strongly connected with ufology, and I believe he has spoken about like alien abductions and that sort of stuff. So this has to be mentioned. The figure is a little controversial. Let's have a look at the abstract. A problem with synthetic aperture radar is that due to the poor penetrating action of electromagnetic waves inside solid bodies, the capability to observe inside distributed targets is precluded. That already kind of underlines what I was saying at the beginning. How did they use SAR, which is usually very superficial when it comes to the way it's utilized normally, to go as deep as 2 kilometers underneath the ground? If looking deeply inside the ground was the overall goal, shouldn't you use something more akin of seismic reflection? And even then, I don't even think it can go that deeply, but I think that's what geologists use. You'll tell me if I'm wrong. Under this condition, imagine action is provided only on the surface of distributed targets. And here is where we go to the claim. The present work describes an imaging method based on the analysis of micro-movements on the Khufu pyramid, which are usually generated by background seismic waves. So it's like a new method, the way I understand it. Now, there would be nothing wrong with that, but of course, one thing that we need, absolutely, and I looked for it and I couldn't find it, is if they have a new method, and this method is capable of presenting new deep imaging underneath the ground in a much more efficient way, then this should be reproducible. This is something that any other scientist should be able to look at and reproduce and come to the same conclusions. In fact, here we see that there are a lot of images, seismic finds, good bunch of math, and a lot of figures. And finally, these figures are better organized than the ones that we saw a minute ago, which were lacking the y-x axes. At least here, they see, well, this one doesn't, in fact. It kind of depends. These don't. these mean nothing, because there is nothing that we can use, like, I don't know what these mean. Given, I'll give you the possibility that I don't know what these means because I'm not an expert. With that being said, if you're so sure about these findings, experts should have access to this so that it can be confirmed by the consensus. The study is very in-depth. What I found interesting, we can have a look at the conclusions, but even if we read this, what we're going to find is that they don't really speak about this cylindrical, how they went from the little 2D imaging with the colors to this little 3D imaging here with the spirals. The spirals are not mentioned, the images are not found. How did they get to this? That's the part that I don't understand. It makes this a little iffy from a methodological perspective. Now, as expressed, this study is available, you can download it, you can study, but it won't take you long to figure out that the study is not new, and it was published on the 19th of October 2022. So this already kind of debunks at least the section where they say that this is a new sensational finding. No, sir, it's been 3 years already. However, where do we get the date of 2025 then? Well, that is because in 2025 the articles do mention that there was some sort of presentation, and I did find the presentation, and it's this one here. It's in Italian, so I'm gonna have to translate it because all of this happened in Italy, and it says it's sold out, and it says Corrado Malanga, Armando May, so here's the third name associated to this, and Filippo Biondi, Giza, le piramidi e la porta del tempo, so the pyramids and the gate of time is the title of the Congress, which occurred at the Hotel Castello Artemide Congressi in, and this is the address, Viale Terme 1010C in Bologna. So let's have a look at this. This was a 4 hours presentation, and it can be watched, if you want, on the channel Expedition Nicole Ciccolo, which is Conferenza here, 3 hours, 53 minutes and 14 seconds. It's in Italian. If this topic really, really, really interests you, I will watch the whole thing. I've watched it a little bit. I will watch the entire thing for you, and then I'll create a little summary and translate it into English if you're really, really, really interested. As for now, I'll just leave a link in the description. Oh, there we go. The 3D models are here presented. They don't speak about how they come up with those, but it is what it is. There we go. So we got the 3D models and everything. So I'll leave a link in the description. Do keep in mind, however, that if we have a very quick glance at the channel, you will notice that there are videos such as Stargate, the temporal spatial gates with Massimo Barbetta, who is the guest, I suppose. Some of the topics appear to be more esoterical in nature, like the idea of whether or not death exists, which I find very interesting, but all I'm saying is, do have a look at the channel. Draw your own conclusions. There are videos on UFO, whether they exist or not. More aliens here, which once again, I'm not trying to shame anyone, but I'm just saying, have a look at the channel, form your own conclusions, draw your own conclusions, and then watch the video. Now, for what I have seen up to this point, and all this stuff in Italian that I've read and I've watched, I haven't watched the entire conference. I will, once again, if you want me to. But for what I've seen up to this point, I'm not really convinced. And what I think is happening is that some scientists made some claims in 2022. These claims have not been examined, nor have they been vetted or discussed by the wider scientific community or academia in general. But regardless of that, they re-exploded due to this conference that currently happened. But unfortunately, before this could be validated or approached by professionals, it exploded all over the place on social media, particularly TikTok. And now we are in a situation where, oh my gosh, we have proof that the aliens built the pyramids. And now, oh my gosh, we've got all the aliens all over the place if you were to listen to what TikTokers are saying. Don't get me wrong. The way the pyramids were built is fascinating, and it's still a mystery. We don't know how they did it. We have a few possibilities, and you will definitely see someone in the comments saying they did it with ropes and copper tools, and okay, that's a possibility, but we don't exactly know how they did it. We have a few possible examples, but we haven't been able to pinpoint one. The one thing that we do know, however, and that's something that I'm noticing people who are making response videos to this but haven't jumped into a deep research on the pyramids themselves, is that the one thing we do know now is that they weren't built by slaves. And that's something that we used to think. I myself have mentioned it once, I think on this channel many years ago, but that has changed now. It has been challenged by archaeologists, and new data analysis and new discoveries that I'll tell you in a little bit push towards the idea that instead the pyramids were built by non-slaves. Let me tell you a little bit about that so that we can kind of learn something from the video. All right, and with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this first glance. It's going to be a little difficult to completely debunk it or to try and figure out if there is even a modicum of truth and maybe some of the things are real. It's a little difficult because of the fact that there's been this explosion, and already finding all of these original documents and PDF and documents and all this stuff was in fact a little difficult because of the overproportionate explosion of people who are just trying to get clicks through this. Regardless, I will keep an eye on this, and I will make a second episode after having watched the entirety of the presentation. And maybe, if I can, see if I can find some contacts in academia that can help me out, maybe a geologist, an archaeologist. I do have an archaeologist already in the team, but we can look at it with other professionals that can help me fill in those areas that are not my expertise. Regardless, I hope you find this interesting and maybe a way to not only give you the tools, give you a little bit of a better perspective with removing some of the noise around all of this, but also showing you that, yes, never trust the articles, never trust the videos, do find the original paper. What are you doing? Why are you not subscribed? Oh, seriously, man, what do I need to do? You've been watching my channel for how long? And every time you're like, no, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next year. I'll do it next century. Seriously, man, come on, just click the subscribe button. Is it the look, listen. I'm gonna do it with you right now. I'm gonna subscribe to my own channel. I can join it though. Oh, seriously, how does that work? How can I join my own channel? Can I pay? Are you joking? YouTube. So I can pay. Click. Holy moly, I can. So I can pay myself, probably because they take a cut, right? So they're fine with that one. Well played. I'm gonna do it now. In 3, 2, 1. See, I subscribed to myself and you still haven't subscribed to me. But seriously, subscribe. Now, that was the first assessment, if you will, where we reviewed some articles, reviewed a study from 2022 that was also published by the same people that are making these claims. However, as mentioned on that video, there is a conference which can be found on the channel Expedition of Nicole Ciccolo, where these 3 speakers, which we see represented here on the thumbnail of that video, actually present these findings. And just for clarity, the names that you see here are not in the same order as the pictures. This is Professor Corrado Malanga, this is Armando May, and this is Filippo Biondi. Now, the conference in question is 3 hours, 53 minutes and 13 seconds. I watched the entire thing. It's in Italian, but I'm a native speaker of Italian. Therefore, what I'm going to do now for you is provide the most comprehensive analysis of every single word they used, what they said, and I will dissect everything. All the sentences, the rhetoric, the discussion, the claims, the way things were presented, so that you can know exactly what was said, how it was said, down to every single possible detail. 4 hours, I could have played 2 games of Heroes of Might and Magic 3. I hope you appreciate my sacrifice. Alright, so let's begin with the details of this conference. I'm not going to show clips because I don't know if they copy claim. It all begins with Nicole Ciccolo, who is the owner of the channel that I've already very briefly showed on my previous video, would refer you to that. Then we have an intro with a little music, and then we begin with the 3 speakers. Speaker number 1 is Armando May, speaker number 2 is Filippo Biondi, and then we finish the conference with the last and most important speaker, who is Corrado Malanga. And goodness gracious, this guy likes to swear. Who likes to swear? The conference happened on the 16th of March 2025. It started at 2:30 p.m. and it was held at the Hotel Artemide Congressi. We are told that they had 900 spectators and the tickets sold out. Now, before we dive into what they actually said during the conference, I do want to say something when it comes to the way the conference was advertised to the public. I'm not going to read the whole thing, just a couple of sentences. Notice this. A team of researchers made of Filippo Biondi, Armando May, and Corrado Malanga united their forces to reveal once and for all what that no one else until today had the ability and courage to investigate. Well, when you put it like that, we can already know why they sold out the tickets. Well, as she begins the presentation and introduces the speakers, she says, open quotes, "We are witnesses of something historical which never happened before." Then she proceeds to read a passage from Gilgamesh, which I will opt out due to lack of relevancy. After this breathtaking statement, we are now welcomed by the intro. And this is when the situation starts to become a little problematic, because on minute 602, we see a Stargate, while on minute 8:06 is when we see a reptilian. There he is in all of his glory. I believe that's a reptilian. I was actually quite offended by that. I was hoping for some grace, not reptilian. It's alright, don't worry, I'll make a video about you. Now, I'll drop the sarcasm for a moment. Let's try to divide the context in which this has been shared, which appears to be a bit goofy, from the actual data and information presented. How did the speakers explain and justify their findings? Is there any truth that we can find as we ourselves review the data and analyze the interpretative findings, as interpretation it is? And you'll see what interpreted it, which is also a little bit of a problem here, something we learn after 3 hours, so yeah. But in general, I'm here to keep an open mind. I always keep an open mind, and I find all of these claims to be absolutely fascinating. But it must be said that the context in which this conference happened, not great. If you have been exposed to this through TikTok or YouTube channels that didn't do even a speck of research and just repeated what the TikTokers said, you will find lots of sci-fi sounding claims. The pyramids are power plants and they have tubes underground that generate electricity. Or they found an underground city. Did you hear the term city being used? I do want to tell you whether or not they did mention these terms specifically. When it comes to the city, I think the reason why people are calling it a city is because both the first speaker in details and the third speaker on passing mentioned the city of Amenti, meaning the hidden city of the dead in Egyptian mythology. I do confirm that both the first and the third speaker mention it, and that's what they think they have found. I'll tell you which area of the scans the third speaker identified as, and I'm quoting directly, open quotes, the rooms of Amenti, close quotes. But the main problem here is the connection, the way the first speaker justifies this claim, which is absolutely ridiculous. But I am gonna tell it how it is. I'm not saying that there are no structures underneath the pyramid. I'm saying that they did mention Amenti, and the way they connected it to the findings, particularly the first speaker, is ludicrous. Contrary to what several articles and a few YouTube videos said, none of the speakers mentions a power plant or the pyramids to be used as power plants, but they do present an alternative usage of the pyramids, which would go beyond the idea of being a funerary site or maybe even a necropolis, if you want to use that term. They don't say power plants, but they do say something, and I'll tell you because that's as we reach the third speaker. He's the one who tells us what these pyramids are there to do. And to finish up with her, so we can move to the first speaker, here's one more thing that she said, my translation. Open quotes, "You are the vanguard of a new time, because from today we begin to write a new page of history. And I'm not exaggerating, the true history of our remote past." Close quotes. His presentation begins on minute 11:34, and it will continue to speak about 1 hour and 2 minutes in the conference. Out of the three speakers, he's the one I like the least. His methodology is all over the place. His rhetoric is terrible. And even though he's the one who's supposed to give us an introduction to how this project came to be, he throws in a lot of metaphysical interpretation, speaks about the spirit, speaks about the mind. It's all over the place. To quote him, he calls the project in question as a, open quotes, project of research that is extremely serious, close quotes. However, on minute 17:36 is when he makes the first claim, where he says that the simple fact that he ran into the other two researchers as he was also working on the pyramid, the same pyramid that they were working on. He said that happened by chance, but it's not chance because, open quotes, it obviously wasn't random because chance doesn't exist, close quotes. Suggesting a sort of preordained or destined that fate, I guess, that they would have to start this quest. And then on minute 18:30 he actually says that they are such a good group that they almost border telepathy. I hope that was just an analogy, but with the stuff that I'm going to tell you, he said, I'm not so sure. On minute 13:84, he calls the other two speakers geniuses. Finally, at 20 minutes and 10 seconds in, he presents his first hypothesis. He basically contrasts the dating of the Giza plateau, which is normally dated by professional archaeologists and historians, to 10,500 years BC, However, he contrasts that and instead proceeds to provide a different dating, which is 36,400 years before Christ. He then very briefly glanced through the reasonings as to why he's adding 20,000 years, more than 26,000 years to the accepted dating of the place, and the only way he does that is by saying, oh, well, you need to take into consideration all the other temples that are in the Giza plateau, not just the pyramids and the Sphinx. And that's it. That's his entire justification as to why he's adding 26,000 years in the past for the dating of the Giza plateau. He then goes into talking about how it's important to understand the systems of communication of this civilization. Now, I find it interesting that he talks about the word civilization, even though he's affirming that this happened 36,400 years, where we don't currently believe there was a civilization. Now, maybe there was one, but he gives it as a statement of fact, not as an hypothesis at this point. On minute 38 is when he starts saying how he disagrees once again with academics when it comes to the identification of a sarcophagus that he instead believes to be a bathtub or some kind of tub. Once again, no justification provided for that alternative interpretation. He then makes a statement according to which, since there are no hieroglyphs that we can read in these pyramids, he needs to find their code, which he believes to be numbers. This is where it's gonna get really insane with Mr. May. Once again, my least favorite speaker. Around minute 45, it ditches the pyramids for a moment and focuses our attention to the Temple of the Valley, which is once again one of the temples that is found in the complex proper. He provides this 2D projection of the temple seen from on high, and that's where he goes absolutely insane. Remember that he mentioned before that he needed to decode whatever the heck these ancient people were trying to tell us without using hieroglyphs, and that he was going to use numbers. Well, here they are. So what he does, he sees this little thing here, which is part of the map of the corridors inside the temple, and interprets this as number 3. Then he says that there are 16 columns, and for some reasons that he does not explain, he tells us, well, it's 16 columns, so that means 7. For whatever reason, that means 7. Then he says that there is this little niche in here. For some reasons, decides to single this one out, give up on anything else, the rooms, the other corridors, nothing. He just decides that this niche is important. There is only one, and therefore this gives us number 1, and comes in this extremely dishonest way to number 137. At this point, he gives up trying to make sense of number 173, acknowledging that that made no sense, and decides to, for whatever reason, flip it. As I translate, open quotes, which, and I didn't even do it on purpose, appears to be the anagram of number 371, close quotes. He then explains to tell us that this number represents, open quotes, the transcendent form of man which reincarnates himself to a new life, close quotes. You'll hear a lot of these, by the way. He then finally mentions the city of Amenti on minute 48:28. On minute 50, he says once again that he, open quotes, believes that nothing is random, close quotes. Then he comes up with another number, 432, telling that this connects space-time with immortality, and affirms that all of this that we have just seen created out of thin air is, open quotes, an indication of what could be underneath the Giza plateau, close quotes. In other words, this man has claimed up to this point, 50 minutes in the conference, that 36,400 years ago there was a civilization that decided to build a temple in a specific order in order to give him hints on some numbers that they wanted us to interpret from a certain number of corridors, but not the other corridors, just the corridors that he liked. And by interpreting these numbers, they are telling him that there is something underneath. This is insane. Minute 51:12 is when he finally introduces the Emerald Tables. He does mention that academia doesn't consider these to be a real finding or something that can be dated, considering the fact that we don't have the originals. But once again, he thinks that's a cover-up. But that's where we have a lot of description of the city of Amenti, which is why he will still proceed to use them as evidence. He then puts up a translation of these words that you see on the left side that he and his team, even though they are not linguists and they are not trained to do it, decided to interpret in a completely different way and provide an alternative interpretation. I'm not even going to go through the interpretation for now, but let's just suffice to say that it's extremely unprofessional. It's clear that they have no idea what they are talking about. It is clear that it has nothing to do with ancient Semitic or ancient Sumerian thought processes, and what they're doing is that they're projecting modern day pseudo new age ideas of spirit that I can tell you right off the back do not belong to those cultures, just to justify a connection to the possibility of having the city of Amenti underneath the Giza plateau. Finally, 1 hour 02, that's the end of the first speaker, and you have seen nothing. Speaker number 2 starts his presentation on 1 hour and 4 minutes in, and is the one that I consider to be the best one out of the three. His entire presentation lasts until 1 hour and 52 minutes in, and I would like to underline that even though, once again, I thought he was the best speaker, these were the most boring 50 minutes of my life. After the introduction of Speaker 1, which was all about the justification, and he completely failed to do that, Speaker 2 talks about the technology specifically. Now, given a lot of the stuff he said, he used a lot of big words, but here is the gist of what I understood. Of course, do refer to someone who does understand the technology, SAR, professionally, for a better description and assessment of his explanations. What they're claiming is that they're using a technique that no one else has ever used, and the gists of this technique is that they are utilizing 2 satellites from space to generate a SAR imaging, but this time, instead of trying to penetrate the ground with the conventional way of using SAR, which would make it for a very superficial analysis, they are using sonar. So all of these images, which we're going to review, and I'll tell you everything what they said about each and every single one of these, this is sound. That's what you're looking at. Sound, specifically vibrations that are captured through the satellite, and then they use their own eyes to try and come to the conclusions, aka this, with the help of artificial intelligence. Now, the section about artificial intelligence, which helped them build all of this, is the part that I think removed all sorts of credibility, particularly from the third speaker, who is supposed to be the big guy, the genius behind all of this, because he does not understand how AI language models work. I will get to that once we reach the third speaker. I'm not necessarily refuting that maybe there is something to this. Maybe there is something underneath the pyramids. But the methodology, the rhetoric, the justifications, and in general the logical process as to how we see X, therefore it means Y, that was used by all 3 speakers, particularly the first and the third, is subpar and extremely unprofessional. This doesn't necessarily refute that maybe they did find something with this tech, but whatever it is, they did a horrible job at making it sound convincing, and you'll see why. So do stick until the end. Open quotes, a technique that we have made to be able to have underground scans. Close quotes. He then proceeds to explain that these satellites, he doesn't really mention 2, but the third speaker does, so he tells us that these satellites are in low orbit. On 1 hour and 20 minutes in, he makes the following remark, open quotes. The heretic thought always wins. Heretic, ere, means aero, meaning air, therefore liberty, freedom. Close quotes. From the context, what I understood by this is that he mentioned how sometimes there were groundbreaking visionaries and people that sort of challenged the established status quo, or whatever it is, the established model within any form of academia, and then he says that they were always right. Sort of new frontiers for science and archaeology and history and whatever. I will say, however, that his etymology and connection to then freedom is nonsense. He just made that one up. Returning to the technical explanation, it tells us that these SAR, the way they're using it, are transmitting impulses, specifically electromagnetic impulses, to the Earth in order to receive echoes of the sounds and vibration underneath the ground. But now let's talk about the validation of this technique, which he talks about on 1 hour 44 minutes in. Now, up to this point, I'm not liking the presentation one bit, but I want to be fair. As you know, that's what I always do. And one of the things that is often used against these gentlemen when it comes to this new technology that they use, which of course has been seen with a certain level of skepticism, is the fact that professional scientists say, well, you need to test this tech with other structures to see if it works first, and then you should apply it under the pyramids. But they claim that they did. So 1 hour 45 minutes, as you see, it talks about the tunnels that are in the Gran Sasso d'Italia, and they say that they were able to use this technology to see correctly pathways and tunnels that we know are there through our topographic mapping. as you can see here and here. This says analysis of the vibrations. And then as the second geolocation where they tried to use this technology to see if it worked, he talks about the Dam of Mosul, once again making claims that the tunnel that is found inside this dam was in fact correctly identified by their scan methodology. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much. As indicated by this picture, as you can see, there is this long blue line would correspond exactly to the tunnel that we do find underneath the dam. And then as you can see, these areas that appear red, which I imagine by watching this, it means they vibrate more, would be equivalent to the turbines that are found underneath. All of this is interesting, but the problem with this is that it's still not enough, in my opinion, to justify or even validate the ability of these scans to correctly interpret and receive echoes and data from 648 meters underneath the ground. In fact, 1,200 meters, as they also claim that they found structures, since these do not appear to be scans that occur at the same level below ground zero as what they claim they have been able to see underneath the pyramids in the Giza Plateau. And unfortunately, when it comes to all of these fannings and areas that were scanned, he never provides an altitude. He never provides any information that could say, yes, but we were able to actually find precise scanning, say, 200 meters underground. He does not mention one time how deep these scans were able to successfully detect data. End of speaker 2. Are you ready for speaker 3? Speaker 3 is the big guy, Corrado Malanga, and he begins his presentation 1 hour 52 minutes in. And one thing that I'm noticing already is the following, which I thought was fascinating. He's telling us that they received the images on the left, and he self-admitted that when they began looking at these, they understood absolutely nothing. He then proceeds to explain how important the different colors are because they represent different levels of vibration, which could mean different types of materials, different types of depth, whether there is something, whether there is an empty space, and then explains how he proceeds to use the computer software, never mention what software that is, in order to help them interpret this data. It's all interpretative, by the way. I do find it fascinating how someone who just explained how important the colors are also self-admits to be colorblind. Precisely on 1 hour, 52 minutes and 17 seconds in the presentation. In fact, there is a section in the presentation that I absolutely loved when he sees these squares and he keeps saying, you see this black square, and black means that there is no data, but the square is freaking orange, but he sees it black. And then he even says, and this area here, which probably you see as red, I don't know, I see it as an orange, maybe, I'm not sure. This is how he interprets the data. And at the end of the entire presentation says that the colors he doesn't see, sorry to hear, are light green, light blue, light brown. He says he does not see these colors. And I love the irony that a man who self-identified himself as being colorblind on multiple sections of this presentation, at exactly 3 hours and 37 minutes in, makes fun of a professional academic who saw their findings and thought they were basically amounting to nothing. And as he makes fun of her, he says, who knows, maybe she's colorblind, laughs and uses that to discredit their opposing opinion. Man, the irony is not lost on this one. Anyways, after a few interesting colorful pictures and 15 swear words, we get to 2 hours 33 minutes in. And this is great. This is where it really gets deep with the law. So he says that they identify what appear to be, so you can see them here in this little representation, and he describes these as some kind of underground structures that have the shape of a, diapason, a tuning fork. So he believes that there are structures like this underneath, and he even gives us a visual representation, this one here. But he says this, open quotes, a diapason, so a tuning fork, exactly while we were looking at something that vibrates, close quotes. And the way he explained this, and you've got to be a native to understand this, he is basically trying to say that it is not a case, it is fate, that they use sonar interpretation and they found structures that, lo and behold, remind you of the shape of a tuning fork. And he thinks there is a correlation. This is the level of professionalism of this presentation. A tuning fork to you, but maybe it's just arches at that point. But no, it's all fate, it's all destiny. It's the ancients from 36,400 years ago that wanted this man to make this correlation for whatever reason. Minute 241 is when he starts to finally tell us about these tubes, whatever you want to call them. He definitely does not use the word column because he says they are not full. They are empty. That's what he says. And then because, as you can see, there are these little segments here, he says that he interprets that as being glass. He specifically said that. So you have glass subtunnels, cords, whatever you want to call them, that go around these tubes that are empty inside. And there are multiple of these. On minute 247 is where he says that they ask artificial intelligence to improve the image by 16%. He does not explain to us what this improvement or enhancement means. He just says that it did, and then he does the calculation. If you look at the top of this image here, you see this little triangle, that's the pyramid. And then he tells us the pyramid is 137 meters tall. And by creating a connection between each single pixel and the height of the pyramid, they were able to then decide that these pipes, whatever you want to call them, go down for 648 meters under the ground. That's how they did it. I would like to underline that he says that this works even though they, and I am quoting him, stretched the image. But he says it doesn't matter because a pixel is a pixel. On 2 hours and 55 minutes in is the part where we get introduced to the concept of pareidolia. For those who don't know, pareidolia is the perception of apparently significant patterns or recognizable images, especially faces, in a random or accidental arrangements of shapes and lines. So, this is the part where he's trying to justify his findings by saying, you might think that this is just me trying to add these shapes, because remember, he's saying there are spirals underneath, and he's saying, but maybe that's just something I see, so he's seeing this because he wants to see something, but in reality, it's not that. Maybe it's something else, but it's not that. Here is how he counters that counter-argument, and that's where we get into the AI part. He says, open quotes, you see that, but I don't see anything. Does artificial intelligence make stuff up? Question. The AI does not have the phenomenon of pareidolia, and it does not make things up. So can the AI identify shapes that are fake? Question. No, because pareidolia is a psychoanalytical phenomenon. Close quotes. So, and this is not the only time when he uses this defense. He's saying, we ran the images and our interpretations through the AI, and the AI said, yeah, you're right, these are tubes. Oh yeah, you're right, that's a cube. And then he says the AI never gets anything wrong, so we can't be wrong about it. This, the AI never gets anything wrong, is what this man stated 3 times during this conference. 3. And the 3rd time is my favorite, because it goes even further, and we dive into the conspiracy theory. Because of course there is a conspiracy theory and a cover-up situation that he's mentioning, and I absolutely love that part. Stick until the end. He then tells us that we are 648 meters under the ground. For whatever reason, he tells us, and it's significant apparently, that 648 is in fact double 324. And he says that 324 is a fundamental number because, this I'm quoting here, because it's a number that he calls epideionic, meaning the length of the axis of space and the length of the axis of time. And 324 divided by 2 is 162. And then he tells us that 162 is important because 161.8 is the golden ratio. And I guess that's the message from the reptilians. He didn't say that. He does say, however, that we need to keep these data in mind for the future. And then he leaves it at that. Once again, just like the first speaker, he comes up with crazy numbers. He multiplies these numbers or subtracts these numbers to other numbers without any reason whatsoever, and then uses the whatever number that he has found to create some form of false correlation that has no grounding in anything, and decides that that's very important, and he never explains to us why. 3 hours and 6 minutes in, once again presents the AI as a cover-all, win-all argument and says, we asked the AI, after explaining what we found, what it thought this could be. And the AI came up with this idea. The AI explains that there is a presence of some emptiness in this space. Hypothetically speaking, these would be the really dark areas in the scan analysis. But then he says that these blue areas that are dark in the scan provided by the radar indicates subterranean emptiness, but they could also suggest the presence of natural cavities or artificial cavity. He, however, as he reads this, misreads it, and instead of reading O here, which means or, he reads it as E, which means and, adding, therefore, the conclusion said by the AI, which the AI didn't, that these empty sections could be natural and artificial, while the AI said natural or artificial. Did he misread it? Was it a mistake? Was it done on purpose? I have no idea, but it's a big thing to now claim that the AI said that these are artificial, since it did not. The picture appears later, but 3 hours, 9 minutes and 12 seconds in is when he tells us that these cubes that would be at the very basis of these pipes are, according to him, what I normally refer to as the rooms or the chambers of Amenti. Then he finally explains to us what the purpose of all this is. He says these were built to support the weight of the pyramid, and without all of this infrastructure underneath the ground, plus a plating that allegedly is supposed to be specifically under the pyramid would have sunk, and that right now would be at least 50 meters under ground zero, below ground zero. 3 hours and 44 minutes in is when he starts talking shit about modern day archaeologists and Egyptologists. 3 hours 45 minutes is when he begins to go deeply into a discussion about the Osiris shaft, which is basically an underground complex that has been found. We do know that this exists, but through their scannings they say that first and foremost, once again, Egyptology, archaeologists, scientists, they're all wrong. He claims that the sarcophagus that is found in here is made of a type of stone that is not present in Africa. He says that this stone was mined in Turkey, and he also says that it's mildly radioactive. His own words. 3 hours, 47 minutes and 17 seconds in, he also says that this black square that we see at the bottom of this underground complex is probably made of the metal tungsten. Tungsten. That would be fascinating. I would love if that were true, but however, he provides no evidence, and the only justification for this remark is the fact that it looks black because it could mean that it's empty, but it could also be that it's tungsten because it would not vibrate, I guess. The conference finally finishes, and that's the part where the presenter now encourages people to buy their books and get a signed copy. So, all in all, for this second episode, I might make more. What did I get from this conference? As I say, extremely esoterical sounding. There is a lot of terrible flaws in methodology. A lot of the justification, particularly the sections on the numbers and how these ancient people were speaking to them specifically, is absolute complete nonsense. And therefore, this kind of counters the argument that some people have presented where they say, oh, well, they had to go and present and give this presentation with the likes of, well, the channel in question that was the host of this conference, even though these are a little quirky, a little corny, with a little aliens here and there, but they had to, because unfortunately they're cancelled by professional academia, and real universities wouldn't allow them to speak. But if that were the case, then the presentation should be perfect, excellent, very, very professional. And if that were the case, even if the environment in which this was hosted was with the reptilians, at least we could say, well, that's the line of defense, that's how we justify it. But as I've just explained, Speaker 1 and Speaker 3, it does sound like they belong specifically to this kind of context. Speaker 2, no, because he mostly went into the technical terms and how the technology works. He also mentioned that they have some kind of brevetto, so like a license in Malta. So they did get an exclusivity when it comes to this technology. They also said that it costs nothing. And this is another important factor. If it really costs nothing, and the third speaker was very proud of this, we spent no money to do this, that's what he said. But if that's true, then why don't you use, and he uses that to sort of counter instead the millions of dollars, the usual other types of technologies that are photographic and usually deployed by the government in that area. They cost a lot of money, but he says that all they provide is nonsense. He's very adamant when it comes to attacking other people and their research. But of course, but then he also says, look, ours cost nothing, but if that's true, then why don't you apply this technology for subterranean areas, and not a dam, not a tunnel in a mountain, which is above ground, but you have to provide and prove with stuff we already know and we have got mapped. It costs nothing, you said. Prove it. Use it. Show us that it actually works underground in possibly similar situations that to what we would find underneath the Giza plateau. So also, once again, how you have to explain to us why water shouldn't interfere with the findings. But after you have proven that, since once again it costs nothing, then I would say we could start looking at this. And I am one of the proponents who says, you really want to know what's underneath? Maybe they got a lot of the stuff wrong, and clearly the methodology and the whole idea with the numbers and how they connect it to a ment is complete nonsense. But maybe there is something there. Maybe the scan did find some structures, and if that's the case, then go and dig. Go and dig. And of course, if the Egyptian government doesn't allow it, well, then I would be against the Egyptian government at that point. Because if this is true, and we can dig, and we find these pipes, whatever they are, well, already, even if they're made of stone, with glass, like they're saying around it, they would already show an incredible feat of architecture. And then we would want to understand why they did it. Is it really to provide support to these pyramids? But imagine if instead they excavate and they made it to titanium. Imagine if they got power. That would really rewrite history. But until you show me and you dig, I don't believe it. The only thing I'm willing to accept at this point is that maybe there is underneath. But this is a very newly used technology, and we don't know how reliable it is. They say it works, but they have a conflict of interest. They're selling books. And I want to close with this statement. Mr. Corrado Malanga stated that these pillars are used to support the weight of the pyramids. He stated that the chambers underneath are part of the mythological Amenti. But he also stated that the pyramids had the purpose of, open quotes, acting as a bell, which is used to gather vibration information in order to transport this information underneath. There's a lot of claims there. Is it real? Is it nonsense? Is it mostly nonsense, but maybe there actually is something underneath? We'll see. But for now, I've provided, as promised, a summary in English of everything they said with my own personal commentary. Now, since I mentioned Corrado Malanga, how about we dig a little deeper onto what he actually claims and believes? I'm going to translate some things for you right now that he said in Italian. Check this out.
E poi gli alieni ce l'hanno l'anima o
But the aliens, do they have a soul?
non ce l'hanno?
Or don't they have it?
Loro vogliono quella cosa lì
They want that very thing
che noi abbiamo
that we have
e che loro non hanno.
and that they don't have. On minute 1932, we're back with the reptilians.
Uno strano essere alto
A strange being entered.
2,40 m,
He was tall, 2 meters and 40,
con la coda.
with a tail.
Sembrava un coccodrillone
He looked like a massive crocodile.
in piedi.
Standing up. On minute 25, there is something we can see when it comes to his specific usage of language. As a linguist, I would like to analyze that too.
E la parte mentale
And the mental part
è indipendente dai valori di energia.
is independent from the values of energy or energetic values. 32-37, more on the aliens.
L'alieno viene
The alien comes
e ha paura di morire
and is afraid to die.
e ci prende quella parte per rigenerarsi,
And he takes that part, meaning the soul, to regenerate himself.
e se no muore.
Otherwise he dies. Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and as you know, I've been recently engaging with these alleged findings underneath the pyramids of Giza. Now this video here, which is the one that has been most successful, is also the one that has received harsher critiques, and one of the things that I wanted to address is the following. As you know, on this video I'm providing a translation from the language used during the conference, which was Italian, which is of course my first language. This is the conference, and as you know, one of the things that I complain about on this video is the way the conference was organized, the context, the lack of professionalism, and some questionable sections. For instance, the fact that in the very beginning we see a massive alien, which I think appears to be a reptilian. People that are countering this argument that I'm presenting have been telling me, well, but you should divide the sort of context in which this is happening, the conference, the channel that is hosting it, which sure often pushes this kind of ideas about the reptilians and the aliens and all that kind of stuff, from the actual scientists, so Corrado Malanga, Armando May and Filippo Biondi, and the sort of information that they are sharing. In other words, simply because they had to use this this medium, this conference, shouldn't bleed onto the information they're presenting. So I shouldn't allow this context to fundamentally sway the way I judge their research. Now, here's the thing. On paper, this would be a fair criticism, and I always recognize fair criticism in theory. No university is going to allow them to do this, so they had to go to this little quirky scenario, and they had to tolerate this that, they showed, and the stargates and all that kind of stuff. But in reality, they have nothing to do with this sort of discussion. Well, here's the problem, and that's why I decided to make this video. On the internet, specifically on YouTube, there are several interviews that have to do with Professor Corrado Malanga. This is a very old one from 13 years ago. This is another one from a year ago. This one is from 2 years ago. And then there is this one from 1 month ago, which is the one that I'm gonna refer to today. Of course, all of these interviews have one thing in common. They are in Italian. So if you don't know Italian, I would absolutely justify the critique that you have given me. Here's the thing though. Today I'm gonna translate some sections that I've specifically selected from this interview, but I will link the full interview down below for you to be able to double check that what I'm translating is correct. It is quite clear that this is exactly what Corrado Malanga pushes, believes, teaches as factual. In this very interview, as you will see, I'll prove it in a minute, he tells us about the reptilians. He tells us about the many different races of aliens that have been coming to Earth since 500,000 years in the past. His words, about the abductees, about the technology that these aliens are putting inside our bodies, about how these aliens are coming here because they want to steal our souls, which are divided into 3 things, but the aliens want one of those things because the aliens don't have a soul, and so they need this soul to increase their life, and some aliens have physical bodies, some other aliens are just spiritual. There is no God, but there is only you, and the aliens are real and have been kidnapping people, and he's got the proof because he saw the microchips. I just given you a too long didn't read of what we're gonna see today. Before we jump into the actual interview and we confirm that he is indeed saying these things, I would like to make one very specific disclaimer. This is not a hit piece on Corrado Malanga. This is not me trying to shame him for what he believes. He is free. He's free to believe whatever he wants. He can sit down and worship Odin for all I care. And if you yourself do believe that there are reptilians out there and that there are greys out there, you're free to do it, and I wouldn't mock you for it. What I'm doing here is not mocking this man for what he believes. What I'm doing here is providing you, who are interested in their findings when it comes to the pyramids and their interpretation of the results of the scans from the SAR technology that they used underneath the pyramids, so that you can see this from a full context. Now, if after you watch this, you think, you know what, I also believe all of these things. To me, this is giving me more confidence in what Corrado Malanga is presenting. More power to you. But at least you're making an informed decision, and you have now been exposed to what this man has been pushing in Italy with his books, with his interviews, with his publications, and with his conferences. On the other hand, if you are a bit like me and you think the majority of what he said to me sounds like complete utter nonsense, and that now gives me a reason to doubt his interpretations of the otherwise plausible tech that the other scientist, Filippo Biondi, has been explaining to us, then great, at least now you can form your own opinion and use your own critical thinking to decide whether you want to consider this man's interpretation trustworthy or not. It's not, however, a video where I'm trying to debunk their findings or try to state that there is nothing underneath the pyramids. I don't know if their tech works. What I do know is that I do not personally believe anything this man says. But this is just my personal opinion. The first extract that I would like to translate is on minute 7.
Un problema da risolvere
A problem to resolve
è che la gente su questo pianeta non aveva capito
is that people on this planet did not understand
che 500.000 anni di storia erano
that 500,000 years of history have been
su questo pianeta state pilotate,
on this planet have been
pilotati da
piloted
altre entità che venivano da fuori,
by other entities that come from outside.
da altre entità che venivano da fuori. Ecco, il riuscire a far capire alla
To be able to make people understand
gente che noi stavamo lavorando su un problema importante,
that we had been working on an important problem.
su un problema importante Per me era un target da raggiungere,
For me, it was an objective or a target that needed to be reached or achieved. The next extract is from minute 7:37.
perché sì, te spieghi alla gente, guardate
Because yes, you explain to people, look,
che ci sono gli alieni,
aliens are out there.
vengono su questo pianeta,
They come to this planet.
fanno delle cose.
They do things.
Abbiamo scoperto perché,
We have discovered why. We found out why.
abbiamo scoperto come,
We found out how.
abbiamo scoperto le collusioni che
We have discovered the collusions
l'alieno ha con i nostri servizi segreti,
that aliens have with our secret services,
con i capi del mondo.
with the heads of the world.
Abbiamo
Ma i
scoperto
capi del mondo lo sanno che questi sono alieni? I servizi
Question from the interviewer, but do the heads of the world know that these are aliens?
segreti lo sanno che questi sono
The secret services, do they know that these are aliens?
certo,
Of course.
lo sanno,
They know,
ma non te lo dicono.
but they don't tell you.
Per esempio, il secondo
For example,
reparto dell'aeronautica in
the second corps of the Air Force
Italia, banalmente,
in Italy
nel nostro piccolo, c'ha un gruppo di sparute persone che vengono
has a small group of people
sostanzialmente sostituite ogni 6 mesi, se no
which they change or substitute every 6 months,
sanno troppo,
otherwise they know too much.
che si dovrebbero interessare del problema ufologico,
They should take care of or should study, we could say, the UFO problem
che ora non si chiama più UFO,
that today is not called UFO anymore,
oggetto volante non identificato, un
unidentified flying object,
acronimo inglese,
an English acronym,
ma si chiama UAP,
but it's called UAP.
cioè
In other words,
qualcosa di ancora più vuoto di contenuti.
something even more empty of meaning or content.
Prima era un fenomeno
Before, it was a phenomenon,
ufologico,
a ufologic phenomenon.
ora neanche più un fenomeno.
Now it's not even a phenomenon.
Sostanzialmente tutte le fotografie,
All of the photographs,
tutti i filmati,
all of the movies or clips,
tutte le testimonianze,
all of the testimonies,
tutte le cicatrici
all of
che
the scars
portano sul corpo le persone che hanno avuto a che fare con questi esseri
that the people that had to do or that dealt with these beings carry on their bodies
vengono misteriosamente bypassate,
are mysteriously forgotten, bypassed,
dimenticate, non guardate
not looked at
dai giornali,
from the media. The next section is on minute 10:12, and he's talking about the abductees, so the people that have been abducted or allegedly abducted by aliens, and that he and some colleagues of his were interviewing and as they were applying hypnosis to try and discover what sort of experiences they had but had forgotten about. I would like to underline that this is something that will come back a lot, that he considers to be factual proof or evidence. If under hypnosis you tell this man that you were flying on a dragon, I wouldn't be surprised if he considered that as evidence. Just adding my own commentary here, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but as you will see, he does take what people say under hypnosis as fact. And he justifies this with references to statistical case numbers that personally, you'll see.
non funziona così. Noi avevamo gente
We had people
che si svegliava la mattina con delle cicatrici sul
that would wake up in the morning with scars on their body
corpo che alla sera prima, quando era andato a letto, non aveva.
that the previous night as they were going to bed they did not have.
E si chiedeva, ma come
And they would ask themselves,
mai ho queste cicatrici?
but how come? Why do I have these scars?
Noi facevamo delle analisi e
We were performing analyses
scoprivamo che sotto queste cicatrici
and we would discover that underneath these scars,
c'erano i segni di una evidente operazione chirurgica.
that under these scars there were the signs of an obvious surgical procedure.
L'analisi di queste persone in ambiente ipnotico
The analysis of these people in an hypnotic environment
mostrava il recupero di una
would show the recovery of
memoria
a memory
che queste persone avevano.
that these people had.
Il recupero della memoria di tutti questi soggetti,
The recovery of the memory of all of these subjects,
tutti, era uguale.
all of them was the same.
a un certo punto si è aperto il muro,
At one point, the wall opened up.
è entrato uno strano essere
A strange being entered.
alto 2,40 m,
He was tall, 2 meters and 40,
con la coda.
with a tail.
Sembrava un coccodrillone
He looked like a massive crocodile,
in piedi
standing up,
e degli esseri piccoletti,
and very small beings,
neri, con 3
black,
dita e il
with 3 fingers
pollice opponibile, il
and an opposable thumb,
quarto,
the 4th digit,
con uno strano, cattivo odore,
with a strange foul smell,
che hanno tentato, io ero immobilizzato, di
that tried to, as I was immobilized,
prendermi, di
to take me and lift me up,
sollevarmi e di portarmi attraverso il muro fuori.
and to bring me through the wall outside.
E fuori c'era una strana cosa,
And outside there was a strange thing,
una macchina
a machine,
rotante,
rotating,
volante,
flying,
rotonda, in cui io ero portato dentro
and they would put me inside it.
e attraverso delle stanze ero posto su un
And through some rooms, I was placed on
tavolo,
a table,
operatorio caratterizzato
a surgical table, characterized
sempre dal
always
fatto che c'era un solo piede
by the fact that there was only one leg
che lo teneva, il tavolo
that was supporting it,
operatorio, fatto così,
made this way,
svasato, tutti
a bit like a vase.
lo raccontavano nello
Everybody told this story
stesso modo
in the same way,
e lì accadeva qualcosa.
and there something happened.
Il soggetto veniva sostanzialmente operato
The subject was practically operated on.
chirurgicamente, sì, certo, e poi noi
Yes, of course.
trovavamo con la risonanza magnetica
And then with the nuclear magnetic resonance, we would find
nucleare, con varie spettroscopie fatte
with several spectroscopies
sul corpo,
done on the body,
le tracce di queste operazioni
we would find the traces of these surgical operations
e le tracce dei microchip che venivano introdotti nel
and the traces of the microchips that were introduced
corpo di
in the body
queste persone
of these people,
e le trovavamo sempre negli stessi posti.
and we would find them always in the same places. After all of this, he proceeds to talk about how these microchips were made of a material that didn't have the same number of isotopes in it and clearly was of alien origin. He says the scientists did see this, but hid it. No proof, unfortunately. The next section is from minute 17:43, and we are told more about these aliens.
E poi gli alieni ce l'hanno l'anima o
But the aliens, do they have a soul
non ce l'hanno?
or don't they have it?
Perché nelle antiche scritture
Because in the ancient scriptures,
gli alieni si potrebbero paragonare a quelle cose che gli antichi vedevano e
the aliens could be compared to those things that the ancients would see
che chiamavano angeli.
that they would call angels.
E nella Bibbia c'è scritto
And in the Bible, it's written
che gli angeli non hanno anima.
that angels don't have a soul. Now, before I continue onto this part, I would like to underline that this is incorrect. In the Bible, there isn't one single passage that tells us that angels don't have a soul. This is a speculation that some people in the faith do have, so there are some people that believe that. I'm not one of those. But to state that the Bible says this is incorrect. He will, as you will see, mention the Bible several times. I would like to underline he's not religious, clearly, as there is a section in another interview that I watched where he says that there is no God, as in my opinion, up to this point, and you will see this, the sort of ideas that he's pushing appear to be a mix between Scientology and solipsism. But I'll defend this in a little bit. Let's continue. On minute 1932, we're back with the reptilians.
L'ultimo arrivato. In questi libri gli americani dicevano: guardate
In these books, Americans said,
che noi ci siamo trovati di fronte a queste persone
look, we found these people,
che sono traumatizzate
they're traumatized,
e il loro trauma è sempre lo stesso.
and their trauma is always the same.
Il loro sogno è sempre lo stesso.
Their dream is always the same.
C'è una specie di serpente
There is some kind of snake
con la faccia da coccodrillo
with the face of a crocodile
che mi entra in camera,
that enters in my room.
alto 2,40 m,
He's 2 meters and 40 tall,
accompagnato da questi piccoletti,
accompanied by these small ones.
e poi non ci sono solo loro, ci sono altre razze.
And then it's not just them, there are other races.
Questi vengono, mi prendono, mi
They come, they take me,
portano, mi
they take me away,
fanno delle cose, io non ho capito.
they do things to me that I don't understand,
In qualche modo io dimentico.
and then somehow I forget.
Ricordo solo attraverso delle opportune sedute di ipnosi.
I only remember through hypnotic sessions.
E attraverso queste sedute
And through these sessions,
tutti raccontavano
everyone retold
le stesse identiche cose.
the exact same things.
Centinaia di migliaia di persone.
Hundreds of thousands of people.
Cioè la statistica è una scienza vera quando si
Statistics is a real science when
tratta di numeri alti.
it deals with high numbers.
Noi in Italia abbiamo utilizzato le stesse tecniche dall'inizio che avevano usato
In Italy, we have used the same techniques that since the beginning
gli americani,
the Americans have used.
cioè sul nostro
Okay. At this point, I would like to ask Mr. Malanga if he is interested in a discussion when it comes to this. Hundreds of thousands of people said the exact same thing is a massively bold, and I would like to underline, unscientific way to put it. The exact same thing. Hundreds of thousands. Or are you applying selective bias and only discussing the ones that appear to be recalling something similar that then you call exactly the same? Exactly the same is a very specific statement within the field of academics and science. Is it exactly the same or is it not? Because the first one only mentioned the crocodile and the small people that were smelling, and then the other one that now you mentioned said multiple races of aliens and there was no mention of a smell. Also, how do we know that what these people are saying, even if, and of course hundreds of thousands is nonsense, but even if there was a certain continuity within some subjects that say that they experience these things that of course I cannot neither deny nor confirm, I don't know, but what I'm saying is, even if, how do you know this is not something that they are copycats? How do you know that this is not something that even their subconscious is making up based on stories that they've been exposed to that then influenced this sort of retelling? He never questions any of this, which to me is very unscientific as a methodology. Not to mention his incorrect explanation and mentioning of the Bible, which is not the first time he does that, and I am someone who has read the Bible multiple times in his life in several languages, and it is a text that I personally love to explore and study, so I can spot immediately when he says something that is not present in the Bible. Once again, I see a lack in his ability to interpret. An interpreter is what we are entrusting him to be with the results of the scans. On minute 25, there is something we can see when it comes to his specific usage of language. As a linguist, I would like to analyze that too.
era il racconto di un istante dell'abduction.
This is the retelling of the instant of abduction, of the abduction.
L'istante in cui la tua parte animica,
The instant in which your parte animica, that's what I mean. Let me tell you about this. So, in Italy, in Italian, we have a word which is anima. Anima can be translated in English as soul, and it can be normally connected to anything spiritual. It's kind of an alternative way to say spirit. In some religion, there may be a slight difference between what you mean by spirit and what you mean by soul. But in general, as a vernacular usage, when you say anima in Italian, you're saying soul in English, S-O-U-L. What he does, he doesn't call it anima. In fact, even the interviewer at one point tells him, so you mean anima. And by the way, to give you a connection to English, it's the same root that you guys use when you say words such as animated. So soul in Italian, anima, it is something that animates you in a way. So you can recognize it like that. He doesn't say anima, he says parte animica, which could be like anemic part. So as you can see, he does this a lot. Either he used highly complex vocabulary that to the listener means absolutely nothing, but it sounds smart, I guess. Or he will substitute a regular word, anima, soul, and create a more fancy, complex sounding version of it that no one else uses. Parte animica. No one else uses that, as far as I know. Never heard it in my life, because it makes it sound wow. I mean, he's not talking about the soul, he's talking about the anemic part. That's what he's doing. A third thing that he does linguistically, that you will notice later on as we continue this analysis, is that he will take a regular word, but use it in a way that is completely different to how you would normally use that word, giving it a completely different sense or meaning. So he will extrapolate a word and fill it with a different semantic meaning. inside it. He does this a lot.
che noi non sapevamo nemmeno che cosa fosse,
We didn't even know what it was.
Cioè
veniva-
l'anima.
So the soul, asks the guy.
Sì,
Yes,
chiamiamola anima.
let's call it anima. Let's call it soul. Parte animica.
È una convenzione,
It's a convention.
è una cosa.
It's a thing.
Veniva staccata,
It was removed from the body.
veniva portata all'interno di un altro cilindro
It would be brought inside another cylinder
dove c'era un altro essere umano
where there was another human being,
che veniva fatto vivere perché
and he was made alive
quella cosa lì gli dava la vita.
because that thing gave him life.
Poi questa cosa
Then this thing
veniva ripresa e rimessa nel contenitore originale,
was taken back and placed again in the original container,
dove sarebbe stata ripresa la prossima volta.
where it would have been taken again next time.
Loro vogliono quella cosa lì,
They, meaning the aliens, want that very thing
che noi abbiamo
that we have
e che loro non hanno.
and that they don't have.
Però capite bene che a questo
But you do understand that at this point,
punto noi dicemmo,
we said,
un momento, fermiamo
hold on a minute,
la palla, cerchiamo di capire che cos'è
let's try to understand what
questa parte che parla.
this part that speaks is. All right, next. Around minute 26-25 is where he goes into the philosophical explanation of what this parte animica, so the soul, is. And you will notice that that's the part where he starts going into this, once again, philosophical discussion on how your soul is divided into 3 sections. No idea where he gets that from, by the way, but let's go.
Queste tre parti
These 3 parts,
divise
divided,
erano la nostra coscienza.
were our conscience.
All'inizio
At the beginning
dei tempi
of time,
erano unificate.
they were united.
C'era una cosa sola.
There was only one thing.
Per farla breve,
To cut a long story short,
si capì che all'interno del nostro
we understood that inside our body,
contenitore
our
ci
container, sorry,
sono tre cose
there are 3 things
vive
alive
che sono noi.
and they are us.
Una parte animica,
A anemic part, the soul,
il femminile.
the feminine,
Una parte mentale,
a mental part,
l'essere androgino,
the androgynous being,
e una parte spirituale che
and a spiritual part,
è la parte maschile di sé.
which is the male part of the self.
Queste tre parti
These 3 parts,
divise
which are divided,
erano la nostra coscienza.
were our conscience.
All'inizio dei tempi
At the beginning of time,
erano unificate.
they were united.
C'era una cosa sola.
There was only one thing.
Poi qualcosa ha diviso la coscienza dell'essere umano
Then something divided the conscience of human beings
e le ha separate
and have separated them
in tre parti.
in 3 parts.
La parte maschile del sé,
The male part of the self,
la parte femminile e la
the female part,
parte androgina, con
and the androgynous part,
tre coscienze diverse,
as 3 different or separate consciences,
ognuna delle quali dentro un contenitore
each and every single one of them inside a container
non sapeva dell'esistenza dell'altro.
is not aware of the existence of the other.
E il contenitore che cosa sarebbe stato?
And what would this container have been?
Quello che i religiosi chiamano il tabernacolo della Santissima Trinità.
It's what religious people call the tabernacle of the Holy Trinity.
Padre, Figlio e Spirito Santo,
Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost
altro non erano che anima, mente e spirito. E noi
are nothing more than the soul, mind, and spirit.
che cosa potevamo andare a dire agli scienziati? Guardate che abbiamo trovato l'essenza dell'anima?
So could we have gone to the scientists and tell them that we had found the essence of the soul?
Non ci avrebbe creduto nessuno.
No one would have believed us.
Così abbiamo dovuto modellizzare questa cosa.
So we had to create a model out of this thing.
Nessuno. Così abbiamo dovuto modellizzare questa cosa e descriverla sotto forma di vettori e di tensori.
And describe it through vectors and tensori. Tensors? I haven't got a clue. I don't know, guys. I don't know what that word means. Back to the aliens.
Queste parti. La parte animica. Per quale motivo? All'alieno
The alien
interessa solo una di queste parti.
is only interested in one of these parts.
La parte animica.
The anemic part, the soul.
Per quale motivo?
Why?
Ed era
For what reason?
Semplice.
And it was simple.
La risposta venne dalla stessa parte animica,
The answer came from the very anemic part,
perché loro non hanno questa cosa.
because they don't have this thing.
Loro non ce l'hanno.
They don't have it.
Loro sono invidiosi di noi
They envy us
perché noi siamo esseri completi.
because we are complete beings.
Questo era il discorso che veniva nelle migliaia di ipnosi fatte.
This is the discussion that came through the thousands of hypnosis that we did.
Loro sono esseri incompleti.
They are incomplete beings.
In quell'istante mi si
In that moment,
svelò anche un'altra cosa,
another thing was revealed to me.
cioè i racconti che ci sono nel mito.
In other words, the tales that we get in the myth,
Sono tutti
Cos'è
così.
il mito?
they are all like this. Interviewer asks, what is myth? This is the part now that he's going to take the word myth, which I think we can all understand. When you say myth, you usually think, at least in context when you talk about the ancient period, if you say myth, everyone would think, oh, he's talking about the ancient Greeks, he's talking about the things that were believed by the Romans, classical antiquity. Usually, when we say myths and legends, and then you can give us of the Norse, of medieval Europeans, of ancient Japanese, usually that's how you use myth, right? Let me show you how he uses myth now, because he has been asked, what is myth? Which takes us to the third language model that he uses.
Il mito è una fotografia
Myth is a photo,
che in un solo fotogramma
that in just one photogram
contiene il passato, il presente ed il futuro.
contains the past, the present, and the future.
La differenza che c'è tra la storia e il mito è
The difference between that we have between history and myth
semplice.
is
La
simple.
storia è storicistica,
History is historic,
cioè
meaning
da un punto di vista scientifico
from a scientific point of view,
la storia viene trattata in modo diverso a
history is dealt in a different way depending on
secondo di chi scrive i libri di storia.
who is writing these history books.
Se ci sono i comunisti a scrivere i libri di
If communists are writing history books,
storia, ci sarà un resoconto completamente diverso,
there will be a completely different telling of the events,
come se invece i libri di storia li scrivessero i non comunisti,
as opposed to how non-communists would write the history books,
i fascisti.
the
Cioè,
fascists.
c'è il detto che i vincitori scrivono il libro di storia dove
There is a saying whereby history is written by the victors.
loro sono i buoni e gli altri erano i cattivi.
They are the good guys and the other people are the bad guys. Oh, of course, I'd like to underline, hopping outside from the translation for a moment, this would be one of the things that I can at least partially agree, because I have a dedicated video on whether or not it's true that history is written by the victors, and I kind of say it is partially true, but it's something that needs to be, it's not like this categorical, all-encompassing statement that defeats all history. History is written by historians first and foremost, and history is written through evidence first and foremost. But it is absolutely true that local political powers will influence not only what's been written, but also how the things that have been written are read, and that's propaganda. So I have several videos dedicated to that. As I say, there are some sections that I may agree, although then again in this section, in this instance I'm agreeing with the interviewer, but I think he agrees with that sentiment. So it's not like that I disagree with everything, but at around minute 30, 40 seconds in is when he explains to us why the aliens want our souls.
Ora più di nessuno. Ma perché a questo punto l'alieno voleva la parte animica?
But why, at this point, does the alien want the soul? I'm just going to stop saying anemic part. I'm just going to say soul.
Perché la parte animica aveva una caratteristica.
Because the soul has a characteristic.
Era caratterizzata da un asse dello spazio,
It's characterized by a spatial axis,
da un asse dell'energia,
by the axis of energy,
ma non da un asse del tempo.
but not with a temporal axis or axis of time.
Cioè era sostanzialmente immortale,
In other words, it's substantially mortal,
indipendente dal tempo.
independent from time,
Mentre la parte spirituale
while the spiritual part
era indipendente dallo spazio
is independent from space,
e la parte mentale
and
era
the mind and the mental part
indipendente dai valori di energia.
is independent from the values of energy or energetic values.
Cosa vuol dire essere indipendente dall'asse del tempo?
What does it mean to be independent from the axis of time?
Vuol dire essere immortale.
It means to be immortal. Right. I would like to underline at this point, if you thought that that was weird in the sense that you couldn't really understand what he was on about. That's nothing compared to what he usually does. Particularly, there is an interview that I might cover. I just don't want to make now a 2 hours long video. But there is another interview where he explains the soul through quantum physics, or he tries to, and you've seen nothing. Like, you watch that, you'll understand 7 words out of 1,000 that he uses. But here we are. Next. 3237, more on the aliens.
L'alieno viene
The alien comes
e ha paura di morire
and is afraid to die.
e ci prende quella parte per rigenerarsi,
And he takes that part, meaning the soul, to regenerate himself.
se no muore.
Otherwise he dies.
Un po' come fanno
Then there is a section that was redacted because he says that they say that their question would have been censored, so I haven't got a clue what they asked him here. Oh, sorry, I kept myself top right. I'll fix it. But anyways, you could hear it at least. I apologize for that. Anyways, in conclusion, there are plenty of other sections where he talks about these aliens, and then there is a whole part where he talks about what sounds like solipsism. I'll give you the definition of that. Solipsism, from Latin souls alone and self, is a philosophical idea that only one mind is sure to exist. As an epistemological position, solipsism holds that knowledge of anything outside one's own mind is unsure. The external world and other minds cannot be known as and might not exist outside the mind. So it seems like that's what he is saying. And I remember these sections of this other interview that I watched where he was mostly preaching a different, slightly altered version of solipsism, where he says, you're the only one existing. I don't know if he means that there is only one actor and everyone else is an NPC, or if he means that every person is its own single actor in their own world. I have no idea. As I was saying, it's complicated to understand, mostly because to me, a lot of the things he says, it's like if you take a bunch of words, put them inside a box, move it, shake it around and see what happens. But anyways, these aliens come. There are also other interviews where he says how these aliens suck your soul out, because there are aliens with a body, aliens without a body. The aliens without the body want to be installed inside the body of humans so that they can preserve their knowledge and culture. And it's interesting that rather than giving us examples of, maybe because this is a super scientist, a genetist of the aliens, now he gives the example of a plumber for whatever reason, and that the aliens want to preserve that, and therefore they take these spirits of these aliens that don't have a body and are placed, maybe because they died, and they place them inside human containers in order to continue. So that's one thing, it's kind of a demonic possession, but the alien version. And then there are other aliens that do have a body and don't want to die. They suck, they aspirate, they suck the souls of humans, that they are these abductees, in order to put them inside their body so that they can cheat death, I guess. This is what he's saying. And it is somewhat similar to some of the basis ideas that you also find in Scientology. So,
Gli uomini sono immortali,
mankind is immortal,
ma gli angeli
but angels
sono invidiosi degli uomini
envy mankind
perché gli uomini hanno quella cosa
because mankind has that thing
che gli angeli non hanno.
that the angels don't have.
Allora
And then
i racconti di abduction
the stories of abduction
che comparivano su tutti i giornali a destra e a sinistra.
Abduction
Vuol dire
abduction means
adduzione,
adduzione,
cioè rapimento
so an alien kidnap,
alieno, no kidnap
but
come
not kidnap,
si potrebbe dire in americano,
like you would say in American,
cioè rapimento.
meaning rapimento, kidnap.
Abduction è proprio il termine che
Abduction is the term
si usa per dire
that
sono
we say to mean
venuti gli alieni e
the aliens arrived
mi hanno preso
and took me
per i loro scopi.
for their purposes.
Noi dovevamo capire quali
We had to understand
erano gli scopi degli
what are these purposes, these goals of the aliens,
alieni.
Esatto.
Innanzitutto, no? Cioè,
first and foremost, meaning looking for the motive.
e il movente si trovò guardando nella mente delle persone che erano
And the motive was found as we looked into the mind of the people
state addotte.
that were abducted,
Cioè,
meaning
si utilizzò la ipnosi
we used the regressive hypnosis,
regressiva ericksoniana.
the Erickson type of regressive hypnosis.
Gli americani questa cosa l'avevano già fatta.
Okay, next, make your own mind. The next section that I would suggest you to check out, but it's kind of long, so I'm just gonna tell you with my own words what he said, but feel free to go and watch it, is the part on minute 22, to give you the exact 2207, where he's recanting, recalling, explaining this experience that was retold by one of the alleged abductees during one of these sessions. And he says that basically his soul was removed from his body and he was having some sort of out-of-body experience when he would see his own body inside of a metal container which was laid horizontally, and then there was a vertical one with a sort of a copy of himself or someone else, perhaps another body, and now they were moving around with his soul and implanting it on something else. It's kind of a long session, so I just want to skip it for now, simply because, yeah, it's what someone said, but he gives weight to that, which is the part that kind of confuses me a little bit. I have recently shared what I think may be a more plausible finding underneath the pyramids, if it is true that these scans actually worked and there wasn't any interference due to the material underneath and whatnot. Now, if the scans did work, what could they be? To me, rather than saying the holes of Amenti, of power generators, or whatever the heck other people think, which kind of borderlines to sci-fi, I would love for that to be the truth, and I would be the first one to show it if there is evidence. I'm not gonna do the cover-up like some people accuse me of. No, I'll be the first one to show it if they show it to me first. But I did come up with a more plausible explanation, and you'll find a link in the description. But for now, let's listen to the man himself, and then you can form your opinion. All of this to say, once again, not trying to shame anyone. As you see, I'm not pointing my finger and laughing. That's not what I'm doing. A couple of times I was a little confused by the way he was explaining things. But if you are aware of the sort of stuff that he pushes, by the way, he used to teach at university, he used to be a chemistry teacher, but he doesn't do that anymore. Because, and from his own words, he has been in the sector of ufology since he was 15. If you are in ufology, then great. I just found you someone to watch. Knock yourself out. Have fun. For me, he speaks about science. He speaks about scientific methods. But then he talks about this situation. And at that point, I'm not going to trust him as an educator, as a scientist, as an academic. I'm not, as I say, the reason why I don't... Now, for some people, these ideas... Now, some of you will believe these things, but for many of you, these thoughts will be outlandish. The reason why I'm not pointing the finger is because I'm a Christian, differently from him, so I also believe in things that I cannot prove to you. I believe in the resurrection of Christ. So if you want to believe that Athena is blessing you today, or if you want to believe that the aliens are stealing your soul like this man, you can do it. You can't prove it. I can't prove it. So I'm not going to make fun of you. The difference, however, is that first, I'm not mixing my faith with science. These are two separate subjects and they shouldn't be mixed. You can believe in both. By the way, I can make a dedicated video if you want. I know some people will disagree with this statement. I do think you can believe in both. With that being said, I don't mix them. I don't use faith to build a computer. Likewise, I don't use science to find God or to interpret faith. I keep them separate within their own spheres. And you're free to disagree with me and say, no, Metatron, I think what you believe in is complete nonsense. Whatever. I respect your ability to say that. I respect your ability to believe that. But what I'm not going to do is to use my faith to discuss the ancient Romans or to discuss an archaeological finding. I'm not going to do that. And in fact, whenever I do make videos that are linguistic and secular in nature when discussing the Bible, I do let people know about my bias. I do say, guys, do keep in mind that I'm a Christian. So I recognize that I have some biases, and that's why I work with a team to try and reduce the effects of those biases. And in fact, it's kind of funny that sometimes people that do point the finger at me and are like, well, we can see that your Christian bias in this statement you made on minute 16. I'm like, well, that statement was not from me. That was from my lead researcher who is an atheist. So it's actually kind of funny that now I have to call him and tell him, hey, did you know that you have a Christian bias even though you're an atheist? Welcome. You're one of us, I guess. All of that to say, that's why I have a team, so that we can call each other out when the biases that we all naturally have come out, and we try to reduce them as much as possible. With this person, I don't think that that's happening. So when he interprets the findings underneath the pyramids, there may well be a real technology, because I have no reason to doubt the likes of Biondi, Filippo Biondi, and the usage of the tech. Also, I have no reason to believe it 100%, since this is the first time that the tech was ever used the way they did. It's a new technique. So until you prove it without a shade of a doubt that the technique works, I can doubt it all I want. But I have no reason to necessarily doubt it until there is some evidence. But I do have reason to doubt the ability of this man to interpret data correctly, because he has all of this stuff in his head. So when he sees an image of the colors that he can't identify because he's colorblind, by the way, but he sees all of these color shades, and he sees something that kind of looks like a pillar. How can I trust that he doesn't see the aliens and the reptilians in there, since that's where he's coming from? Not to mention, at the end of that conference, he specifically said that the reason why his evidence cannot be questioned is because he used AI, and AI never gets anything wrong. That's another statement that is objectively false, and this demonstrates to me that what he considers as categorical oftentimes is not, because we know that the AI gets stuff wrong all the time. Regardless, this was a video not to discredit this man, not to slander this man. I'm not doing that. But this is a video specifically made to respond to those people that said, you were biased because you saw the reptilian at the beginning of that conference, but you shouldn't have considered that as a fair representation of what these people are presenting. Well, this man believes in the reptilian that are 2 meters and 40 centimeters tall, and he believes that it's still your soul, and all the rest of the stuff. So yeah, I think the reptilian was a good representation of the type of person that is now presenting these findings. At least when it comes to Corrado Malanga. Once again, I don't know if Filippo Biondi believes in the reptilians. I'm more than happy to ask him if that were the case. Have I got the atmosphere right? Let's go, let's go. Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and I am a content creator. And I've been one for the better part of a millennium. As such, sometimes my videos can generate a little bit of, friction. Let's put it that way, particularly controversial ones. Now, as you know, if you write Metatron pyramids, you'll get a few of these controversial videos that really ruffled some feathers. Particularly these two, because they got a lot of exposure. Some people really, really liked them and shared them and were very nice about it. And then other people, ooh, they got really pissed. Which is why, let me introduce you to the first hater of the day. Boom! Will Fox 1037 says, this guy is just part of the cover-up. And he really means it, because 20 hours ago, he did it again on another video. Metatron is part of the cover-up. Both of these highly intelligent comments were left under this video and this video, respectively. What is being implied by this gentleman is that I am part of the cover-up of the truth of what's underneath the pyramids and who built it and all of the different aliens that are involved in the process. Now look, my natural response to that would be my usual. I would say, guys, I don't know if there were aliens here 30,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, and I always have a little bit of a possibility, because I do believe that aliens exist, and I can't completely dismiss the possibility, the very intriguing possibility, in fact, of the ancient astronaut theory, whereby aliens may have visited us and they may have built some of the structures. All of that is fascinating to me. I absolutely love it, and I can't dismiss this completely. Of course, up to this point, I haven't seen enough evidence to convince me to become a massive supporter, like someone who actually makes videos and tells you this is how it is categorically. The aliens were here, guys, and they are here right now. I'm not there. Okay, I don't know if I'll ever be there. Kind of depends on what happens. If I get kidnapped tomorrow, then I think I will be. Otherwise, we're going to need some more evidence for me to actually take into consideration this as a matter of fact, which is what a lot of people do. But then again, I'm not someone who tells you, no, and it's impossible, it never happened. I don't know that, so I can't say that. I can't completely dismiss it. And therefore, as I always say, I leave a small window of possibility, but the size of that window depends on the amount of evidence that has been presented to me. Or I would say all of this if YouTube didn't do this. Plot thickens. On my latest video on the pyramids, titled Were the Pyramids Built by Slaves or Paid Workers, Replacing a Myth with a Myth, YouTube added this, whatever the heck, note. Reptilian humanoid with a connection, a link. What is happening? With a link to this. Lizard man, reptiloid, in folklore, South Asian, in fiction, it tells you all about it. All the bibliography that you want. You got a nice, lovely picture of the reptilians and the aliens and all that. I would like to ask this question now. Considering the fact that on this video, on the entire 21 minutes and 24 seconds, feel free to check, I didn't mention the reptilians once. Why is this here? Why am I... Are you saying that I am a reptilian? Is that what you're saying? Is YouTube telling us, look, we can actually identify skin suits? This is not a human being. This is a reptilian, and therefore I get called out. That's one interpretation, one possible interpretation. Or the other interpretation for this is that the system, yeah, I get it, I get it. Stop sending me here. That the system automatically connects the question, how were the pyramids built, with reptilian humanoid. So, I'll be honest with you. I don't know which one is worse at this point. That I am the reptilian, or that the question is automatically connected by the systems to the reptilians. They got me, guys. I think in honor of that, I need to change the colors here. Okay? Better, right? Alright, in honor of the reptilians, let's go. 8 days ago, this guy is in on the cover-up. So we've got, and I mean, if BHHVVBVGYVBUVV tells you that, by the way, what the heck is that? Is it a panda? Is it what? You will notice that since I've started talking about this, quite a few people have accused me of being part of the cover-up. And I do remember this comment that I couldn't find, but I'll have to look for it. But there was a comment that actually specifically said, well, almost 1 million subscribers, 100% is in it with what? Who's paying me to say this? The government? The aliens? The greys? The reptilians? Which one it would... Because I would like to know, you know, at this point, since they're accusing me of getting paid off to, I don't know, cover up something, then I wouldn't mind getting like $1 or $2 million at this point. Might as well. Could use my PayPal, by the way, whoever it is that is paying me for the cover up, because I still haven't received a cent. So I wouldn't mind, considering I'm being accused of it anyways. If you want to send me $1 or $2 million, be great. Pay off my house, take my wife to a nice vacation to Mars. Then at the same time, I'm also a fraud, because apparently Romans were not white either. Go Google it. Neraland identity fraud. I'm sorry, what? Then we got this comment. He a fraud, says the guy who doesn't even know how to conjugate the verb to be. That's no apostrophe. Why I should be uppercase. Stopped listening to him long ago. He part of mainstream, so media. All right, so I'm part of mainstream media. Am I? Man, I should be on TV. Where is Piers Morgan? Why aren't you inviting me? Goodness gracious, literally, Morgan is inviting everyone but me. What about me? Joe Rogan? Joe Rogan, want to have a little conversation? We're going to speak about, I don't know, Italy and pasta and how to make bolognese properly. You know, I should be on both CNN and Fox News. How about that? Get me on both. Metatron everywhere. Metatron is the media. RJ2Y08, your name is Metatron. You're a wannabe blatantly lying to people. I'm a wannabe what? You have to put something, you need a noun here. RJ, if I can call you like that. No, it makes you sound cool actually. You need a name there, 08. You're a samurai wannabe. You're a Roman wannabe. You're a knight wannabe. You're a creator wannabe. You gotta put something there. Blatantly lying to people. Low IQ lames just accept anything as factual. Because of course he has high IQ, as you can tell. Because he could use his extreme intelligence to understand that my name is Metatron. Names should be capitalized though. You need an uppercase here, Mr. High IQ. So there is that. At least he got you correctly, so I can respect him for that. I can respect him for that. I need to make a video on what it means to lie from a linguistic perspective. I'd love to see how people today, if you say something they disagree with, it's a lie. With this statement, I have just described 95% of every single response and debunking video that was ever made against me and my points, particularly when it comes to ancient Egypt and that whole conundrum, but in general. Oh, we don't like what he says. That sums it up, all right? Wadas 9042 8 days ago edited. So this is the best version. Yay. Yay. That sounds kind of biblical, the way he wrote it. Comma. call you educator. Yeah, that's what I am, comma. But if you really think aliens built pyramids, you're a fraud. Have my dislike. You know, I was about to say, excuse me, but I didn't say that. That's not me. I'm not the guy who says that the pyramids were built by the aliens. This guy doesn't even understand English. You absolute... Oh my gosh. I appreciate that dislike doesn't do anything anyways. Oh, you know what it is? Oh, it's 8 days ago though. Because I don't know, maybe it's because he saw the thing that called me a reptilian, I was about to say. So maybe he's like, you're a fraud because you're a reptilian, you're not a human being. But this is 8 days ago though, so it doesn't fit, unless you can see the future. I mean, that could be. I mean, I don't know. But as you see, this is the anti-alien side. Then there is and he's so emotional that he didn't even watch my video and just decided, simply because I decided to speak about it. Oh, you must be a fraud. Calm down. It's not good for you to live like that. Have some pasta. Okay, hear me out. Do you really want to thicken the plot? Well, wait until these people see my green card and my work permit in the US, because I am called, technically, a legal alien. It's on my documents. You wait until I mean, you know, maybe one thing could be a coincidence, two things could be a coincidence, but what about now? YouTube calls me a reptilian and slaps it underneath there. The US government calls me a legal alien. I don't know, man. The case is starting to get strong here against me. All right? You think I'm done? I'm not done. But Metron, if you were really an alien from outer space, then why would you choose to pretend to be from Italy of all places? It's quite obvious, my friend. Because I can pretend to be Italian. There it is. And all you need to do is change a letter. Change a letter. Look, incredible. That's it. That's me. That's me, all right? I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Be thankful that you've got a resident alien and not a resident evil. It's much better to be a resident alien. Here it is. You see? Foreign national, that's me. Resident alien, alien law, that's me. Permanent resident alien. Thank you. Holy moly, look what I found. Warning aliens. Could you imagine you saw this on the streets? Punishable $10,000 fine if you find an alien. Alright, anyways, I think that does it for me. I read enough stupidity for one day, so I'll just move on to the next. Pyramids again. When will it stop? Alright, so I was having a good time looking at these, right? Because as you know, we've been discussing this thing about the possibility that maybe if the SAR scan technology is indeed reliable and they did find something, some sort of structures underneath, we've all been trying to figure out if it's true that there is stuff in there. Well, we wonder what it is, what can it be? And now clearly a lot of people went into the sci-fi aspect of this, like apparently there is this, well maybe not. Some people are going very architectural about this. I mean, this could be pretty cool. Look at that massive Anubis. Although then again, the sci-fi ones are my favorite. Do clip this, by the way. I hope that they find this. This would be. I am so excited for this to be dug. Now, given I have spoken about the conference at length on these two videos here, and as you know, I did not like the conference one bit. I think the three speakers were Biondi was okay, but Armando May and Corrado Malanga, I think, are terrible speakers. Their conference was horrible. I don't care if people hate me. I tell you what I think. I do not care that it offends people. I watched the entire thing. It was extremely unprofessional, and particularly Corrado Malanga. I've been looking at some of the stuff he said online, and not credible. Not credible. In my humble opinion, of course. With that being said, that doesn't mean that now I'm going to say that there is absolutely nothing under the pyramids given. I don't think this is the most likely possibility. But once again, if you dig, and there are these pillars that perhaps are made of titanium with glass spiraling around them, glowing energy, I would love it. I would love it. I really hope that that's what it is. It's just that I'm trying to apply Occam Razor in this situation. Now, I have said multiple times that Occam Razor is not a perfect tool or device. The idea that the simplest explanation is the most likely, maybe not. Maybe it's not one. Sometimes the Occam Razor fails, that the most complex explanation was the correct one. We do have to at least try and apply it for intellectual honesty. And the idea that the pyramids were some sort of power plants or they were used like this, for instance, like this is all great, but it is not likely. It's not probable. It's possible, but not probable. Because I can't debunk the idea that maybe aliens visited us. Who the heck knows? but it is not likely. So my opinion is, in this situation for this video, before new evidence comes out, then we could start discussing more about the sci-fi stuff, perhaps the science fiction, and maybe we get to remove fiction for some of the science fiction. I would love that. But before we do that, in light of the fact that we're still waiting on the actual excavations, let's try and apply Occam razor and come with an idea, with an hypothesis that it's a bit more believable than what the Corrado Malanga and Armando May stated, that could still make logical sense, assuming that there is, in fact, something underneath. So to make my position clear, Malanga believes this is aliens. They seem to also believe that these are pillars that were built to support the structure, but then they also believe that it's the city of the dead, Amenti, underneath in there. This is their statement. That's what they believe they have found. But they don't know if that's what they found, because when you look at the scans, particularly, let's see if I can find the pillar one. Pillars. When you look at the actual scans, and they kind of look like elongated, and they're like, oh, these could be the pillars. Here they are. It's not like it's telling you what it is. This is still an interpretation. I am willing, for now, to remove all skepticism just for the sake of argumentation and say, yes, there is something in there. And I'm also willing to go a step further and say, this stuff is not natural. It's man-made. It's artificial. In my opinion, it's probably a mix of both. But let's just, it's limestone underneath, and we do know that there are cave systems that do occur naturally inside limestone. But let's say that, yeah, some of this does look like maybe it is man-made. So let's, for the sake of argument, say that this is artificial. Before we say, however, that these are pillars with glass spiral cases that create maybe energy for an underground power plant that connects to the realm of the dead and all of this kind of stuff, or that it's used to support the weight of the pyramid, how about we consider the possibility that maybe these were mines? Let me expand on that. In the history of mankind, we don't have any situation that we can point at where we have massive 1.2 kilometers of depth pillars used as support structures for megalithic, pyramid-like architecture. We don't have that. And even more so, we don't have that with high advanced technology, of course. We can't point to it. However, what we can point to is extremely deep mining systems. For instance, this is a list of the deepest mines in the world. A lot of these are in South Africa, some are in America, India, Canada, and you see 4 kilometers. So this is twice as deep, and compared to this, 648 meters and then 1.2 kilometers, so 1,200 meters underneath, as the findings show, wouldn't be so crazy to believe, because we have something that is 4 kilometers, 3.9 kilometers, 3.7 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers. We have a lot of these very deep mines. Oftentimes they're gold, sometimes they're uranium, copper, and that sort of situation. Now, the idea behind this hypothesis, the way I would support it that I'm presenting here, is that the concept of digging a mine underneath and creating a complex exactly under what you're trying to build has been done. For instance, the ancient Romans did this in ancient Paris. So Paris was a Gallic town. It belonged to the Gauls, and it was called Parisi. And what the Romans did, as they controlled that area, they changed the name to Letitia, and then they started digging underneath, creating underground mines that were used to collect the limestone, put a pin on that, to then continue the expansion above ground of the rest of the town, which is how they did it. And this was not uncommon in the ancient world. They did that. And in fact, the catacombs of Paris, the underground massive labyrinth that I have covered on a dedicated video, you'll find a link in the description, well, some of these halls and some of these shafts are in fact former ancient Roman mines that are still under there, and they can go down up to even 200 meters below ground zero. The Romans were famous, or should we say infamous, for their mining projects all over the place, the Roman Empire, in fact the Republic, even in Britannia, for instance, they did a lot of mining operations in order to then use those stones to build the settlements, because again, the Romans built in stone, which was one of the main differences between how their sort of architecture and the architecture of the, for example, Celtic tribes, which instead tended to predominantly use wood, not only wood, but obviously the Romans were the ones that were extensively building with stone. This is a 1908 map of the mining operation and exploitation of a lot of underground sections of Paris. And again, some of these go back to the 5th century, to the 6th century, and even earlier than that. and some of these go back to ancient Rome. Now, the Roman settlement of Lutetia was expanded through limestone because that's the kind of rock that was found together with other types, but this was the main one. And we do know that limestone is indeed what's underneath the pyramids of Giza, and it is one of the main components of the millions of blocks that are used to actually build the core of the pyramids. So, in other words, is it possible that all of these pretty colors do represent man-made structures, considering the fact that some of these are in fact hollow? We have been told these are not columns. They call them pillars, but they did say during the conference that they are hollow inside. So is it possible that these are mine shafts that extend all the way deep in order to collect the stones and then bring them up with some sort of system so that they would collect the raw materials in loco? Now, given this is not a perfect answer, I do understand that we know of open quarries that are not too far from the pyramids that are being used, and we like quarry pits, and we also know that some stones were transported from other locations in Egypt. With that being said, though, that doesn't necessarily exclude the possibility that they also, at the same time, considering the number of blocks in the millions that they needed in order to do this, who knows, maybe they did also get some of that raw material directly from underneath the pyramids. Now, to try and now attack my own hypothesis to see if we can find holes in it, or to also kind of assess how valid it could be, one critique could be the idea that maybe this would make it more fragile. Could things collapse? Now, on one hand, sure, but then again, if these scans are real, they do have these shafts in it, and it didn't collapse. So these empty areas exist if the scans are to be believed. So at this point, we're just trying to explain what they could be. And do keep in mind that limestone mines, as I was saying, still exist under Paris. One example will be under the Coercion hospital in the 14th arrondissement, and it still exists today. It didn't collapse. Now, given some of those under structures had to be reinforced later with walls, but maybe these were built with walls around it. We'll have to see. Maybe, only maybe, that spiral thing that they say they see, perhaps as part of the system used to move the raw stone before it was being prepared. All in all, this is just an idea, just a little hypothesis that I wanted to throw in there. I'm not saying that I know the answer. I'm not even saying that there is something underneath, but at the same time, I'm not saying that there isn't. What I am saying is, dig. But the one I want to focus on is this one here. Did I figure out what's under the pyramids of Giza? Giza. Can't even pronounce it. What am I going to figure it out? Can't even pronounce it. Anyways, during this video, I proposed an idea. Rather than going for the more, shall we say, sci-fi explanations on what these scans could mean, I decided to come up with an hypothesis that would be based on what we know that ancient people were doing, aka mining shafts. Now, given it is not a perfect explanation, I understand that. In fact, maybe it shouldn't even be called a hypothesis. Maybe it's just an idea put out there. Still, is not as silly of an idea as you might think. Now, of course, even though Filippo Biondi, who is the main scientist behind this whole discovery, said that he's 90% confident in the results of the scans, the interpretation presented by, for example, Corrado Malanga, to me, just doesn't sound possible. And as I was saying, I am inclined to believe that perhaps Biondi did find something. I just don't think that the explanation presented by Corrado Malanga is fit and reliable. In fact, even realistic. However, if time passes and they do confirm that yes, there is something underneath the pyramid, I think the idea for the mines is not as silly as you might think. And when I say you, I mean this. Quite a few comments were left by some of you viewers underneath that video where you were sort of countering my idea when it comes to these mines. Now, some are very professional, like this one here. Others are more on the mocking type. Some are even accusatory in nature. Yeah. Still, if I had to summarize all of these comments, I would say that the sort of counter-arguments that have been presented have to do with four main arguments. The water issue, the temperature issue, the oxygen issue, and the lighting issue. I would like to now address and respond and possibly resolve all of these issues. But do keep in mind that this is not me trying to absolutely defend my idea. No, I might still be wrong. But what I do notice when it comes to a lot of these comments is that the people that are rejecting this idea a priori are not really familiar with how mining operations worked both in classical antiquity, Bronze Age, Iron Age, etc. Because a lot of these problems were absolutely dealt with and even solved by, for example, the ancient Romans and the Greeks. Also, there is a plot twist. We'll see that in a minute. The water issue. If there is an underground water stream, no ancient mining operation could be conducted, as the galleries and shafts would get flooded. The temperature issue. As you keep digging underground, the temperature increases and eventually reaches a point where no human could survive, let alone work and extract material. The oxygen issue. Once reached a certain depth, airflow is interrupted, ventilation becomes a problem, oxygen is not available, and workers would die. The lighting issue. If you go deep enough, you wouldn't get any sunlight and you can't use torches down there, so workers would have to mine in darkness. We are in the ancient Egyptian context, but I do have to be able to speak about other people as well, because we have to use the most documented ones we have in order to start building up a little bit of a hypothesis defense. Let's focus for a moment onto the ancient Romans, as they have left us a lot of documentation on how they conducted their mining operations. Finding metal ore deposits and transforming them into mines was indeed a major focus of the ancient Roman Republic and later of the Empire. In fact, we could say that the search and acquisition of metal ore was so important in ancient Rome that it affected both foreign policy and defined international relationships. Metal is a very broad topic, it's a massive umbrella term, so let's at least divide it into two categories. Strategic metals, such as iron, copper, tin, and lead, and precious metals, such as gold and silver. Now, of course, before we even talk about what sort of mines and how they produced them and what the operations looked like, we have to describe how the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks managed to, first of all, locate a deposit with mineable veins. Obviously, they did not have access to modern technology. Still, the ancients were extremely resourceful and very methodical, and they did have a highly documented system for finding raw material. Regardless of the fact that Romans and Greeks didn't have a structured theoretical understanding of geology as we do today, they made useful observations that helped them find metal ore with an incredible degree of success. Pliny, Roman author and naturalist, noted in his writings that certain types of soil or earth were associated with specific ores. This shows that the ancients were able to recognize patterns in order to locate where valuable minerals could be found. It is by going deeply into the sources that we can identify at least 4 specific techniques that were used by the ancients to locate said materials. Placer deposit tracing, metal affinities, layer contacts, and adits for prospecting. Placer deposits are concentrations of valuable materials, like gold for example, that have been moved by water and deposited in streams or riverbeds. The Romans would follow these deposits upstream to find the source, a smart prospecting technique. When it comes to metal affinities, the Romans noticed that certain metals tend to be found together, what we now understand as related elements often occurring in the same geological formation. Layer contact. The Romans and the Greeks observed that metals were often found at the boundaries where different rock or soil layers met, what modern geologists would call geological interfaces or contact zones. Lastly, adits are horizontal tunnels dug into hillsides. The Romans used these in a limited way for exploration purposes, as noted by Diodorus. Now, we do know that one of the characteristics that moved the Romans into investing manpower and resources into extraction of certain materials from the raw deposits had to do with the strategic and tactical importance of said materials. See, for example, tin and copper in order to be able to produce bronze, iron in order to be able to produce wrought iron and steel for their weapons, and then, of course, gold and silver for obvious monetary gain and profit. Tin, for instance, was one of the reasons why Julius Caesar decided to try and invade Britain in the first place, and why Claudius continued the endeavor. And even though tin and iron may make the Romans invade a land or even put their men on a ship and navigate to a different country, gold and silver would be the type of metal that the Romans were ready to go full in to gain. When it comes to gold, the Romans tell us that there were 3 ways in which they would acquire it. Either the easiest one, river stream deposits, and they say that that was the most refined one. The second possibility was to extract it from mountain debris. But the third, and usually most difficult one, was to mine it in underground shafts, which connects with my theory when it comes to the ancient Egyptians. Now, ancient Roman mines are fascinating because when they have to go underground, usually they would begin to dig vertically. So if you were to look at them from the side, you would exactly see that. They would see perhaps a sort of cylindrical shaft that goes down and it's empty inside as they proceed to go underground. And sometimes some of these shafts can go down as far as 200 meters under the ground. The ones under the pyramids go down to 648 meters. Of course, that would be unheard of when it comes to looking at the ancient period, but that makes me want it to be real even more, because then it would help us rewrite what we know about ancient technology in connection with mining operations. Still, what the Romans would do is that as they continue to dig deeply vertically, the moment they would run into some metal and precious metal, then they would start digging horizontally, creating a little bit of a tunnel. Now, these were oftentimes very small, so you couldn't stand up inside of one of these, and oftentimes the workers had to extract the material with the pickaxes as they were laying down. Not very comfortable. Still, what's interesting about all of this situation is how they handled all of those problems that were brought up by my comments section: water, temperature, oxygen, and lighting. Because, yeah, even if you go down to just 200 meters, you would still find all of these problems. So how did the Romans address them? And why does it matter when we are discussing the Egyptians? Well, before I answer each and every single one of them, I'm going to give you the plot twist right now. So, plot twist. The way the Romans learned how to handle the water issue was something that they learned from the Greeks, but the Greeks themselves learned from the Egyptians. When it comes to water, we know that drainage wheels were used, and also the Romans created a system to divert underground rivers the moment they would notice that they would need to dig through one, as they were obviously aware of the fact that it would flood the entirety of the shaft. Now, for those of you who want to have even more details than what I'm about to present, I'm going to leave 3 links in the description. Link number 1 will connect you to this interesting study called Roman Mining and Quarrying Techniques and the Reuse of Mines. It's very detailed, so I think you're going to like it. But if you want something really for a pro, then I would suggest this Roman mining and metal production near the antique city of Ulpiana in Kosovo, which is a 450 pages PhD thesis entirely dedicated to mining in ancient Rome. And I've been studying it deeply because I'm extremely interested, but once again, it's almost 500 pages, so there is that. However, for today, what I want to look at is this page presented by Earth Science Australia, because it's concise, but it's extremely articulate and full of details, and will help us answer in a proficient and professional way and resolve some of these issues through the usage of the sources. For instance, if we click on the drainage section, we see how the ancient Romans dealt with underground mining when encountering rivers and water tables specifically, and we read: the control of underground water could determine the viability of a mine. This water comes from percolation from above the mine, or more rarely, from digging into the sea or a subterranean river. Many mines simply stopped at the water table. Mines that went below quickly filled with water when abandoned. While they were being worked, the Romans used several methods for handling the water. So already up to this point, we can see that the problem, the issue that was presented by some of the commentators is absolutely viable. Yes, a water table, and in fact even underground rivers, are a problem when you run into them in the middle of digging and mining for mineral extraction. But they didn't give up. The ancients, in fact, figured out highly complex ways to deal with the problem. For instance, as we read, they could drive drainage adits below working levels, use slaves to bail the workings, or employ one of 2 mechanical devices. Diodorus states that, open quotes, at a depth they sometimes break in on rivers flowing beneath the surface, whose strength they overcome by diverting their welling tributaries off to the side in the channels, close quotes. So the ancients were absolutely capable of doing that. Occasionally, water could be diverted into a natural fissure, but the miners drove artificial channels as well. Drainage adits, also called crosscuts, are found at some sites, and then it gives you the sites. As we continue, water drained from the upper workings into the adit, but during the digging of the adit, the water had to be handled by another method. When the flow was not strong and labor was available, bailing could control the water. Pliny tells of Hannibal using a line of water water barriers along a 2.2 kilometers gallery. And I would like to underline, imagine creating that very gallery using only iron and bronze tools. Also, before we continue, don't forget that I make my own rings, Ring of the Noble One. So don't be a muppet, link in the description, get yours today. Bronze, silver, gold and platinum available. If you're a little bit on a budget, the bronze one is the cheapest, of course. Thank you so much, back to the video. And in fact, one of the things that we might look today is how they did it, because often we imagine the pickaxes, which is absolutely something that they used, but another instrument that they used that is called a gad, G-A-D. It's pretty much a iron bar with an acute ending that they would place in contact on the face of the rock that they're working, and then they would hit it with a hammer so that they would break out a flake. And then they would rinse and repeat until they would have removed enough material to either extract the ore or continue the creation of a gallery. Imagine doing that. It's a lot of work. We read that baskets of esparto grass, waterproofed with pitch and bronze or wooden buckets, have been found in the mines. Now here is when the situation gets interesting. We are getting close to the plot twist that I was about to tell you, which is the whole reason why I even brought up the idea of the mines underneath the pyramids in the first place. When it comes to Egypt, we read, from the 1st century AD, Roman miners had access to 2 water lifting devices. The earlier one is the Archimedean screw. This one, the earliest one. Diodorus describes the use of the screw. Check this out. Open quotes. They draw off the streams of water with the so-called Egyptian screw, which Archimedes the Syracusan invented when he visited Egypt. By means of these devices, set up in an unbroken series up to the mouth of the mine, they dry up the mining area and provide a suitable environment for carrying out their work. Since this device is quite ingenious, a prodigious amount of water is discharged from the depth into the light of day. Close quotes. So, next they're going to tell us about Vitruvius and other types of mechanical devices that the ancients used. But what's interesting about this, which once again kind of lifts up the validity of the theory or hypothesis that I had proposed, in fact I shouldn't call it a theory, with the idea that these could be mines underneath the pyramids of Giza, is that we are told that this entire invention that the Greeks used before the Romans, so this is even more ancient, they got it from the Egyptians. Archimedes invented it when he visited Egypt, which very likely what that means is that he copied it from the Egyptians. The Egyptians had invented a specific type of screw that they can use to take care of exactly this one problem that they would have encountered if they were trying to create mining shafts in the limestone underneath the pyramids of Giza, because they would run, as you correctly stated, in that water table. Egyptian screw. Plot twist indeed. Maybe my idea wasn't so stupid after all. Now, when it comes to overcoming the problem of lighting, yes, the miners would have had to spend some time, at least in the dark, but even though they couldn't bring torches with them or live fire, they did have oil lamps. And in fact, these would be the exact same oil lamps that they would be using in Roman homes. And not only we've got proof that Romans used specifically these oil lamps inside the deep mines underneath the ground, as the sources tell us, but Pliny mentions that the consumption of these oil lamps also marked their shifts. This is how common they were. And just to imagine, these would be basically dishes made of terracotta with a wick. Now, just to get even more fascinating, Diodorus is the one that mentions that sometimes these oil lamps would be mounted on the miners' heads. So, it's basically the ancient Roman version of modern mining with the little torch on the helmet. Mind-blowing. Ventilation and bad air is something that the Romans were absolutely aware of. We know that Pliny tells us that as you review the data, it is quite clear that the ancients absolutely were aware of the dangers of both poor ventilation and bad air. In fact, even the fumes that come from the furnaces were something that they knew could be toxic and damaging to both animals and humans. Remember, they don't have access to modern medicine, they may not understand genetics, biology in the same way we do, but they are keen observers, and there is a lot that you can determine and figure out with accumulated generational knowledge when you simply look at cause an effect. Strabo, Lucretius and Vitruvius mention this problem, and in fact it is the latter that tells us how they fixed it. One of the things they did first to sort of assess to see if they were going so deep that the air started to become dangerous was to lower a lamp inside to determine it and observe if there was an airflow sufficient for human survival. And this is where we get into the ingenuity of the ancients, both the Romans and the Greeks, and in my opinion even the Egyptians at this point. What we know that the Romans did is that they created artificial ventilation. So how would they achieve this? Theophrastus is the author that helps us understand how they thinned the air. So what they did is that, as you know, we just said that they would create these shafts, but then they would cut in the ground right next to it in parallel smaller shafts. And these were used so that as they were working, the warmer air will be pushed up and then replaced by colder, cooler and more breathable air. We read, "But if the flame is snuffed out by the power of the gas, then ventilation shafts are to be dug next to the well on either side. In this way the gas vapors will be dissipated through the shaft as through nostrils." Pliny even refers to a wavy linen strip. And as the article here suggests, we are told that Pliny even refers to linen strips that were used to create artificial air movement or flow. Temperature was also another massive problem. In fact, we read that for every 30 meters deeper, the temperature increased by 1 degree centigrade. And without having to go deeply into this one, you can imagine how much of this is going to be a problem once you already increase it by 10 degrees as you go down 300 meters in the ground. In fact, this is why oftentimes in iconography, miners are half naked. That's one way to address the problem, but possibly change of shifts might be another one. By reading the sources, one of the main things that you notice is that clearly the deep shaft mining, was the least favorite version of ore extraction by both the Romans, the Greeks, and I want to say everyone, because it was dangerous, people would die, time and resources had to be allocated, and of course you had to be very ingenious in order to solve all of the different problems that you would have to deal with. And in fact, I'm going to add one problem on top of all the problems that have been raised by my own community, which I appreciate by the way, since you inspired this entire video. And that is the fact that the materials that you get at greater depth are not exactly the same as the materials you would get above the surface or at very shallow depth or in a very shallow pit. That is because as you reach greater depth, below the oxidized ore zone, the ores you would have extracted would have been sulfide ores, which the Romans of course figured out how to treat, but that would have basically extended the process, made it even more complicated. Now, clearly, in our day and age, we were able to go a lot deeper. I mean, I did misspeak in the previous video and I said 4,000 kilometers. Of course, I meant 4,000 meters, so 4 kilometers underground. But we do have a lot of mines where, with modern technology, we can still overcome a lot of these problems which continue to pile up and become even more of a problem, even more of an issue as we dig deeper in the mines. But think about it this way. If watching this video with the information I've shared, which was a very surface level discussion on ancient mining, if the information I presented already surprised you, and there were quite a few things that, gosh, you did not know that the ancients were capable of doing, and in fact, you had no idea that people in antiquity were even capable of thinking this way, then who knows? Maybe, and only maybe, if we were to find other mines, maybe not underneath Giza, but in other places throughout the world, perhaps we will be surprised the same way, or maybe 2 times fold, when we figure out just how ingenious the ancients were. Which is why I'm still gonna pencil it in, my hypothesis. And of course, lately we have all been speaking about the pyramids a lot due to several alleged findings. So you'll find links in the description to my current videos, and I'll be making more. But one thing that I noticed that always happens is that people who never looked into pyramids, people who never looked into Egyptologists, have now become experts in ancient pyramids, in the Giza Plateau, late Bronze Age Egypt, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom. Everybody knows everything now. Isn't that fancy? Like literally, Assassin's Creed Shadow becomes a thing. Everyone is now an expert on samurai history in feudal Japan. Now it's the pyramids. Everybody's an expert. Overnight. Must be alien tech. Alright, what am I on about? Well, as you know, loads of different content creators, YouTubers, scientists, alternative archaeologists, loads of people decided to, share their own opinion, which up to that point, great. Me included, of course. But then as people start discussing the pyramids, I've seen a few YouTubers saying, well, the pyramids were built by slaves. And then when that happens, when anyone makes this statement these days, you will find their comment section invaded. It's gonna become an invasion with all the people screaming, I can't believe you said that. Don't you know that the pyramids were not built by slaves? That's been debunked. They were paid workers. You will find this. It's become a thing. So let me address that very quickly, because I feel that in order to debunk a misconception, people have created a new one, a new myth. So let's address it. This whole discussion about the pyramids is not new. People have been trying to figure out how they were made for a very long time. But if you look, there are a lot of articles, we'll check a few, that debunk this myth that the pyramids were built by slave labor. This was on Yahoo, but if we open Google, it's the same thing, where the Egyptian pyramids built by slaves, and people say, no, this is wrong, not slaves. Archaeologist Mark Lather digging deeper, blah, blah, blah. Reddit, of course, Discover Magazine, The Guardian, Quora, everyone is now debunking the myth. And even AI answers, and generally speaking AI models, are now debunking this idea. And as you can see here, AI overview, the widely accepted view among archaeologists and historians is that the Great Pyramids were not built by slaves, but rather by paid laborers and skilled workers, not enslaved people. Now, this is wrong. Well, you better prove that statement, Metatron, or very easy to do. What is wrong about this is that it is the widely accepted view among archaeologists and historians. This is not true. And the reality of fact is that if you spend more time into actually looking at what professional Egyptologists have been saying about this since the freaking 90s, publications that go all the way back, if you don't want to go too far back, and you go with the publications all the way to 2015, 2018, 2019, you will see that this is highly debated. And among the archaeologists and historians that do present this idea, which you of course have some, you will notice that they are not categorical. They are not categorical. And I've read a lot of these statements, and so has one of my team members who is an Egyptologist, and of course we looked into this, and they're not categorical. They'll tell you, yeah, maybe there were quite a substantial number of paid workers, maybe, perhaps, although while at the same time several of these historians and archaeologists also acknowledging the idea that still a substantial part of that workforce was most likely slaves. As usual, this is a game of telephone. Someone says something, but then by the time this gets repeated by people who get emotions into it and just get mad, the final result, the final message will be significantly different for what it was originating from, which was perhaps some paper or a dissertation or a publication, an academic thesis, what have you, that had made a statement that wasn't categorical, and then it becomes categorical. In fact, it becomes the new doctrine that cannot be challenged in any way, shape or form. And to me, that tells us a lot about what sort of problems we have in today's society with the high access of the internet. Not that I'm saying that people shouldn't have access to the internet, but I'm saying that people should spend more time looking at what the evidence is, what these professionals are actually saying, what the debate currently is, rather than reading one article here and then spending all of their time going around getting mad and debunking people in the comment section and trying to shame people. For instance, BBC Science Focus says, contrary to popular belief, it wasn't slaves who built the pyramids. Notice this is a statement, categorical statement, you will not find professionals making this kind of categorical statements. We know this because archaeologists have located the remains of a purpose-built village for the thousands of workers who built the famous Giza pyramids nearly 4,500 years ago. I had the good fortune to work on the site in 2005-2006, and it was incredible to watch as the find came in. Now, one of the ways this is normally backed up is this part here. Animal bones found at the village show that the workers were getting the best cuts of meat. More than anything, there were bread jars, hundreds and thousands of them, enough to feed all the workers, who slept in long, purpose-built dormitories. Then she makes the statement, slaves would never have been treated this well. Well, this already is ridiculous, because even in freaking plantations in the United States, the people that were working, who were absolutely slaves, were both given dormitories, purpose-built dormitories in fact, and they were fed. Now, best cuts of meat? Debatable, but even if it was, this other statement here is ridiculous. The laborers would have been enticed by the mix of high quality food and the opportunity to work on such a prestigious project. Well, this is a very strange thing to say, considering the fact that we do have documents and evidence that tells us that people tried to run away and they were punished for doing that. But before we continue reading these articles, and you'll see that a lot of these statements make absolutely no sense in light of the actual evidence, let me tell you what my position is, so that if you only watch until here, at least you know what that is before I go and debunk the debunking articles. Here's my position. Based on everything I've read on this topic, my belief is that all the pyramids of the Giza Plateau, so the Great Pyramid, Pyramid of Khafre, all of them, were built with a mixed labor force, which was composed of skilled paid laborers or professional workers, specialists that had skills. These would have been the type of skilled laborers that she's mentioning here, which would have been the type of laborers that are mentioned oftentimes in these articles. They are absolutely a thing, and these probably weren't slaves. Actual slave force, so people that were coerced into doing this, and they were slaves for life. These would have probably been used in the quarry pits or doing all sorts of unskilled labor, such as moving stones around, pulling ropes, bringing water, and that sort of stuff. I believe these would have absolutely been slaves. Third, corvée labor, so people that were forced to do this. It's a form of conscription, if you will, by the state, but they were still probably paid, and once their contract ended, then they could return to their free life, so they weren't slaves for life. And you could consider this type of corvée labor as a form of alternative to taxation. So you can do this instead of paying taxes, or if you can't pay taxes. Would these qualify as slaves? Well, I mean, they are forced to do it. They were not happy to do it, like someone is trying to say this. However, the simple presence of a remuneration, does that make it not a slave? I mean, maybe. It's kind of a matter of definition then. But then again, they would be punished if they try to run away. They would be placed in secure environments. They would be guarded. They would be forced to work the amount of hours that the pharaoh decided. The pharaoh, of course, had complete control over their life or death. Punishment would occur if they don't do things the way they were told. I mean, and not to mention that if they try and run away, they will be punished by turning them into lifelong slaves. So sure, we can put them in a separate category, but it still isn't a flower and rainbows kind of scenario, which seems to be now what BBC and these other articles are trying to paint. Then there would be prisoners of war and foreign conscripts, so people that were imprisoned and they were forced to do this kind of job. 4 types of people, 4 categories. It's a multi-layered situation, and it was probably a very sophisticated system. Tens of thousands of people for decades would have had to be employed in order to produce all the pyramids that we have in the Giza Plateau. And it is really difficult to estimate precisely how many of these would have been slaves, what percentage would have been skilled laborers that were paid and treated well, how many of these would have been instead part of this corvée labor system, and how many of these were prisoners of war that were forced to do this together with the slaves. But the idea that, oh, there are no slaves whatsoever is ludicrous, because we know that the ancient Egyptians did have slaves. We've got legislation that tells us about how these slaves are supposed to be treated. The original idea that we had how these were all slaves and the pyramids were built entirely by slave force is incorrect. We know that there were skilled laborers and probably a high number of them. Still, we have to be careful not to make counter-categorical statements when now, oh, there were no slaves, slaves didn't exist, no slaves, they don't exist, I don't want to look at the documents, I don't care about the documents that say otherwise, because then we are going to replace a myth with another myth. Continuing to read the BBC Science Focus before we move on to the next article. Today, many of the highly experienced archaeological workmen at the pyramids come from the same region, though they are paid in hard currency rather than prime beef or accolades. I don't know what this has anything to do with it. Building the pyramids was not an easy job, understatement of the millennia. The skeletons of some of the workmen show that their muscles were under a large amount of strain, but they may not have resented their jobs too much. Yeah, you do it. Even if it's not as... Okay, let's remove for a moment the focus on the actual slaves or prisoners of war, because, I mean, yeah, those didn't want to do it, and they were forced to do it. Remove those for a moment, and let's focus on the actual corvée labor for a second. You are with your family. You're enjoying your life, but the time comes, and the pharaoh's guards come to collect you. And by the way, once again, the records show that if you don't go, they will take an equivalent. So if your son is supposed to do it and he doesn't go, they'll force the father to go and work the corvée labor. If the daughter was supposed to do it and she doesn't go, she disappears, she runs away, then the mother is going to have to do it. So it's not like they were lenient about this. They come and collect you. You've got to go. You don't want to, but you have to. Who knows for how long? Maybe you have to do it for a year. Maybe you have to do it for 2 years. I guess it depends on a lot of taxation. I might actually look at the evidence with you one of these days if you want me to go deeper onto this. But can you imagine you have to do this for a few years every single day? Yeah, they resented it. We know they resented it. People ran away. The only ones that I can imagine are the highly skilled ones that are being paid well. It's a job. They don't have to move the stones. They don't have to be there with copper pickaxes trying to get the stones from the limestone quarries. Instead, maybe they are helping with the architectural projects, the designing. Maybe they're even working on the plaster, because do remember that the pyramids originally were white. The pyramids were glittering, in fact. Completely, and unfortunately, this is all gone. What we see today... I want to show you this. This is the core. This is the core. This is not what they would have looked like. In fact, you can even see a little bit of the remaining here of how it was covered, but the reality is something like this. And the very bright white limestone, I don't know if that makes me a white supremacist, but here we are. The bright white limestone would have glittered with the sun and kind of creating a sort of sparkling jewel in the middle of the desert. So I can see how the skilled laborers that had to do the final work or the plastering, or maybe the ones that were still doing preparation of the stones, sure, I mean, they were paid well, probably they were fed well, as we say, and yeah, they were not slaves, they were skilled craftsmen. So I agree that it's wrong to say that the pyramids were just built by slaves. No, it's a lot more complicated than that. Then maybe those, the specialists, might not have resented their job. I'm happy to consider that possibility, but what percentage is it? How many were unskilled slaves? Because they also were part of the monumental task. As we continue reading, but this time on the magazine, discover who built the Egyptian pyramids, not slaves. Look, it's always categorical statements. The professionals don't do this. The professionals don't say this. Pyramids workers were paid locals. Yet historical narratives and Hollywood films have made many believe the Jews built the pyramids while enslaved in Egypt. Yeah, foreign slaves were also part of it, by the way. We know that categorical fact, that they were also part of it. But yeah, no, it wouldn't be just slave Jews. Sure, I don't know who's saying this, but there is no end to conspiracy theories about who built the pyramids. Frequently they involve ancient aliens, lizard people, the Freemasons, or an ancient advanced civilization that used forgotten technologies. Scientists have tried and failed to combat these baseless ideas, but there is another misconception about pyramid construction that plagued Egyptian scholars for centuries. Slaves did not build the pyramids. And once again, you will notice this with all of these articles and what they are connected. If you go and read the original, see, in the 1990s, a number of humble gravesites of pyramid workers were found, surprisingly short. Exactly. So there are absolutely Egyptologists, academics that have been presenting this new idea since the 90s at least, where we say, you know what, I think there was a significant amount of professional skilled laborers and they would have not been slaves. Yeah, people do present this, but they're never categorical about it. In fact, the only ones that I've seen being categorical are people who are not specialists on the field. So someone who is, is an academic, but something else, and they are repeating what someone else said, but then it's misquoted. It's kind of a hit or miss when it comes to the validity or the quality of the information presented. But what I noticed is that the people, if you really go down the rabbit hole and find the original professional statements, it's never this categorical, and it's never, oh, let me debunk the myth, there were no slaves involved whatsoever. It's not a thing. So what all of these articles are guilty of, and then we become guilty of this as well if we repeat this without actually looking at the evidence, is that we replace a myth with a myth. Then it reads, they found the evidence for large barracks where as many as 1,600 or more workers could have slept together. That's wonderful, but it's clearly not the entirety of the workforce needed to build the pyramids, even the first one, which is the biggest one, of course, but I'm saying even because for that one we have less documentation, but we still know that the force would have been at least 10 times this, at least. It's probably more than that. And then again, the fact that they were placed in barracks, were they coerced? But even if they weren't, okay, let's say that the 1,600 are in fact skilled workers and they are not slaves. That doesn't mean that there were no slaves involved. And archaeologists also uncovered extensive remains for the many meals they ate, including abundant bread and huge quantities of meat like cattle, goat, sheep and fish, which makes sense because you want to make sure if someone has to do these very highly manual jobs, makes sense that you spend enough money to feed them well. These workers' graffiti can also be found all over the building they create. Then it talks about the marks, they say the names of these bands, which is great. Together, these hieroglyphs give archaeologists hints about where the workers came from, what their lives were like, and who they worked for. Nowhere have archaeologists found signs of slavery of foreign workers. This is nonsense. They have. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. There are plenty of documents that, this is why I'm saying, it's ridiculous that they make these claims. We know the ancient Egyptians had slaves. Everybody did. The Romans had slaves, the Greeks had slaves, Germanic tribes had slaves, Black African tribes had slaves, everybody had slaves. And when it comes to foreign workers, what about prisoners of war? They are mentioned in the Egyptian papyri. They are mentioned. Meanwhile, there's ample evidence of labor tax collection throughout ancient Egypt. That's led some researchers to suggest workers might have rotated through tours of constructions, like a form of national service. However, it's also unclear if that means the workers were coerced. No, it's absolutely meant they were coerced, at least some. Again, I'm open to the possibility, in fact, I do believe that there probably were highly skilled specialists and precision workers that were not slaves, they were not coerced, they were just hired to do a job. They were very well paid for it because their work was highly in demand. And so, yeah, absolutely, that did happen. I do believe that. I don't know what percentage that is, but absolutely they are part of the workforce that helped creating the pyramids. Then you had the coerced ones that are, however, not slaves in the sense that a slave usually is a slave for the entirety of their life. A slave usually is someone, if you're born into slavery, so their kids are also slaves automatically. Sometimes when it comes to slavery, depending on the culture, there are situations in which they can still be paid. Like even Roman slaves were paid. So the simple fact that they could make money. As a matter of fact, some slaves could, if they did a very good job, they created high profits for their master, but they still kept enough money to be able to buy their own freedom. That's something that does happen. So, but they're still slaves. It's not like just because they're being paid now, they're still coerced. They still can't leave. They will still be punished if they don't do what they're supposed to do. They're still property. A slave is property in the ancient period. Of course, there is a difference between chattel slave and actual ancient slavery, but I think we can all agree that regardless of which definition we want to go with, ancient slaves in fact should be the definition that we're looking at. All of these boxes are going to be ticked. If you are a free individual in ancient Egypt, a free Egyptian, but you have to provide a certain level of corvée labor and you're forced to do it, then we could say that maybe technically you are a slave, but only for a certain period of time. But we can distinguish it from the full-time slaves, the ones that you're a slave and your kids are going to be slaves. If you are doing corvée labor, yeah, you're forced to do it, but your kids are not going to become slaves. So yeah, you're not technically a slave. So I'm happy to put it into a different category, but absolutely coerced. There is no question about the fact that she says it's unclear, or he says, whatever it is, it's unclear. No, it's not unclear. It's absolutely clear that people had to do it and they were forced to do it. And then once again, if they try and run away, there will be punishment for it, which already tells you they're not there out of their own volition. But yeah, they're a different category, the corvée workforce, and then the prisoners of wars and foreign prisoners. They were also slaves at that point. I mean, you could go into the technicality of what differentiates a prisoner from a slave. Some prisoners could have like a sentence, and then once the sentence is finished, they are free again. But then again, if you are a prisoner of war, usually that doesn't happen, you're pretty much a slave. That's how it was. And it really annoys me when people get really mad simply because they read this and then they say, if someone mentions slavery in connection to the pyramids, they have to go and get mad and debunk them. If someone says the pyramids were only built with slave labor, then I agree. They are incorrect. There were absolutely paid professionals that did constitute a part of the workforce, and there were corvée laborers who weren't slaves, and they also were part of the manual labor that helped build the pyramids. But slaves were absolutely part of it too. And it's insane to deny this. And at this point, I don't know if they're denying it to try and spread some message. Oh yeah, no, slavery is bad, but slavery didn't exist. So let's pretend that slavery didn't exist in ancient Egypt because we don't want to... I don't know what they're trying to do at that point. No, slavery absolutely existed in ancient Egypt. And I am positive, let's put it this way, highly positive, that a reasonable amount of the people that worked into the building of the pyramids were slaves. Anyways, this is just one of the many things that we've been talking about lately, and I thought, because this has been coming up again, I noticed it in the comments, and I thought, I think it's a good time to bring some light to this topic and discuss the multi-layered system that is a lot more complex than a black and white situation. There were no slaves, they were all slaves. It's more complex than that. Hey there, it's pyramid time again. And we are back again, come on! I've recently reacted to a big chunk of Joe Rogan Experience, I can't even talk, but today we're gonna see exactly the sections when they talked about the SAR-scan technology, the buildings under the pyramids. That section is fascinating. Let's start with something short and sweet. Check this out.
What if these Italian guys are onto something and you can find more stuff?
I want you to come to see what I do and what I discover.
I want...
Okay, so that was just to give you an idea of what we're doing today. So this is most likely we're going to be it's either it's in my book, I've been doing this for 52 years, or come to Egypt. It's literally this, but whatever, I'm really interested. You know me, I've already spoken extensively about the supposed alleged findings under the pyramids and the city of the dead, Amenti, and the aliens and all that kind of stuff. I'm very skeptical about it. With that being said, I'm interested to see what he does, because up to this point, he just laughed. But let's see. Heated debate about Khafra Pyramid SAR-scan Joe Rogan Experience. Let's go.
It's under the paper Signature Aperture Radar Doppler Tomography by Filippo Bondi. And if you scroll down, Jamie, you'll see an image. And this image is of the Osiris shaft, which...
He made an interesting sound there. What was it?
Image is...
That sounded like a reptilian right there.
The Osiris shaft, which shows that they got an accurate depiction of that from space.
That's not true.
From satellite. It's not true.
No.
So what are you saying, that they're lying? So
they're
this
lying.
Right here.
They're completely lying.
But if they're showing, using these techniques, things that we know that you discovered that absolutely exist.
Now, these techniques, as I told you, scientists said that these techniques cannot show 600 feet under the pyramid. The Osiris shaft that I found was only 50 feet
right, but
under
it's
the ground.
showing at least for 50 feet that this is accurate. True. What makes you believe those scientists rather than these guys from Italy?
Because the scientists are scientists.
Well, these are scientists as well.
They are.
That is, Filippo Biondi, maybe, but Corrado Malanga and Armando May, Joe, if I can call you Mr. Rogan. No, let's not just give people the title of scientist just because the press says it or just because TikTok says it. No, no.
They are not showing their techniques carefully. They have not.
What do you mean they're not showing their techniques carefully?
Take the techniques that they said and show it to any scientist. No
He seems really angry about it, though. Him.
no one can tell you this is accurate. I ask it every person who knows about radar, ultrasound, all the people work with me. The scan pyramid project, they said this is bullshit. It cannot happen at all. Now, tell me.
So you're telling me that these scientists that are proclaiming the capabilities of these satellite tomography devices that are saying that they can see kilometers into the ground with this stuff.
That's not true. Are
you sure?
I did.
Do you understand the technology?
No,
You don't.
not me.
So
But
you're just listening to other people.
Scientists who are in.
Well, to be fair, yeah, exactly. Like if you, one thing I think we can do, and I've mentioned this on my video reactions to the whole project thing, of which I'm very skeptical, as I said. I don't understand the technology either, so I don't judge it on the merits of the technology. I judge it on the merits of the methodology, of the historical justification, of the interpretations, of everything that they have done to build upon their interpretation of the data gathered by these scans. So, to be fair, the simple fact that we don't know exactly how this technique works, because we may not be SAR specialists on the field, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be skeptic and just accept it as the gospel of archaeology at this point. So even though I'm not a fan of Mr. Hawass up to this point, considering the reaction I did yesterday and the other reactions I'm going to do in the next couple of days, in this case, he said he asked other scientists. That is the correct thing to do. But then you would have to discuss the methodology, which I have. But let's see how this one continues.
In this field.
Have you talked to these scientists that are saying that they have these discoveries?
I made a press release.
But did you talk to them?
I did not.
Why not?
Because they did not talk to me. How can I find them?
Would you be willing to talk to them?
Of course,
if I
am.
Connect you to them?
Yes.
Oh, that'd be good. If Joe Rogan can connect Armando May, Filippo Biondi, and Corrado Malanga in an interview with him, I would watch that immediately. That would be very interesting. But I don't think it should only be him. He also needs to bring someone else that he thinks is a reputable scientist and professional when it comes to SAR technology, so that we can have kind of a 2v2 or 2v3, that sort of situation. That would be interesting.
Okay, I'll connect you to them. I'm just interested, if new technology becomes available and they figure out a way to look into the ground and you discover things, especially if they discover the Osiris shaft and it turns to actually
They
be
did
accurate.
not discover the Osiris shaft again.
Okay, you discovered it, but...
Yeah, goodness gracious, we get it. We get it, Mr. Hawass. You discovered it. Again, I think there's a little bit of a language barrier here, but let's see.
They used their technology to show an accurate depiction of the interior of the Osiris shaft.
The Osiris shaft
is that true?
No.
It's not.
The Osiris
the
shaft,
images that we showed,
the
is that true?
The Osiris shaft is known to everyone.
Right.
It can be seen by
when
everyone.
they turn their equipment on the Osiris shaft, it shows the actual interior.
Maybe, I don't know, but
Yes.
this is 50
Let's
feet.
look at it
But
again.
they're talking about 600 feet.
I understand, but if it can go 50 feet, why can't it go
Okay,
600
now
feet?
I am again.
Do you know?
Again, I'm not a scientist.
Right, so why are you dismissing it, though?
I gave what they published
I
to a
understand.
scientist, and they said that's not true.
Yeah, there we go. So one thing that is strange now, he's saying, maybe I don't know. So if you don't know, it's strange that you will be that categorical in rejecting any possible findings. Because personally, I didn't necessarily have a problem when I reviewed how the technology was applied onto, for instance, the laboratories at the Gran Sasso d'Italia in the Abruzzo region of Italy, or for example, how the technology was used on the dam. It's like it looked like it worked for things that were above ground or even only minutely under the ground. The only complaint I had was the fact that this was not comparable to 648 meters under the ground or even all the way down to 2 kilometers under the ground. Also because if you consider the possible difference in the type of material that these two satellites that have been used may encounter, how that can affect the accuracy of the scans, but also water tables and whatnot. So I think it's fair to say the other tests that you have shown to demonstrate the viability and accuracy of this technology on stuff that we know has already been mapped are not sufficient because they appear to be different from what you claim to be able to do 2 kilometers under the ground. That's a fair critique that I myself have raised against the three scientists. However, what he seems to be doing now is to tell you categorically, no, it doesn't work. I don't care. It doesn't work. It's wrong. It's false. It's lying. And then where Joe presses with something that in this case I think is appropriate, saying, okay, but it seems like that they could map the Osiris shaft correctly, he says, I don't know. But if you don't know, how can you then be that categorical? That's why I say often I'm skeptical because of everything around it, everything surrounding it. I'm just not going to go into the details now, but I'll put some links in the description if you want to see what I mean by that. Particularly when it comes to the first section of the conference and the last section of the conference, which were the supposed justification based on culture, history, interpretation, and translation, which failed completely. And it was just a mess of numerology and the craziest application of selective bias. That's what I have a problem with. And of course, the reptilians that appeared on screen during the conference.
Okay,
But
but
no, listen,
scientists
then
are wrong all
okay,
the time,
fine,
particularly
fine.
ones that are biased.
Then
correct?
what I did,
That I would agree. Well, yeah, that doesn't mean that we can't trust scientists anymore, because otherwise, I mean, it's scientists that built the microphone you're using, Joe Rogan, and the headphones that you're using and everything else. But I understand where he's going with this. He's saying just because someone is in a position of authority within academia, it doesn't mean that they are always right. You should always kind of double check, and we should see the data ourselves and use your own critical thinking. I absolutely agree with that. Just wanted to kind of add a little caveat of interpretation. With that being said, you should also be then call out the bias on these three scientists, because they have an enormous bias that is for everyone to see. Whereas this possible selective bias that you're mentioning now, when it comes to the scientists that Dr. Hawass has interrogated about this, it's supposed. There may be, there may not be, we don't know, because we don't know who these people are. But we do know for a fact that the three people involved in these scans have a monumental bias on their side. We do know that. Just watch the conference or watch my translation of the conference, link in the description below, and you'll see what I mean. So out of these two groups of scientists, the one that we know for a fact have a bias are precisely the ones that push these scans and the interpretations thereof.
I made a press release
Okay.
Right.
explaining my point.
Yes.
And I said, my work of the second pyramid, that the base of the pyramid is 28 feet of solid rock.
Right.
And there is no way that anything can be happened in the solid rock. And I
Well,
explained...
I think what they're saying is it's underneath the solid rock, correct?
Let me finish. And I said, your techniques that you published in this magazine is not refereed by scientists. You just
Refereed, I think he means it's not been peer reviewed. Maybe that's what he means.
published it. And number 3, the team that working in Giza with all these new techniques, they said this is wrong. They know.
The team that's working in Giza with
His
all
team?
these techniques, what do you mean?
We
What
have the
techniques?
scan pyramid team.
Right.
They're working.
But you understand this is different technology.
I understand, but they
Right.
know about this technology.
But have they used this
No,
technology?
they said this technology cannot work, cannot show 600 feet under the pyramid at all. This is what they said. And this is why, if the Italians were confident, they could contact me. I'm the pyramid expert.
Yeah, I wish they did. I actually wish they did. I think now that this has been aired, and that's a good thing about this interview, by the way. It's an excellent thing. Because now he said if they are confident with this technique, and we know they are confident, that's what they are saying, like in the percentage of, it's 90%, I think, that Filippo Biondi says is confident with this. So they are confident. They stated it during the other interviews. For instance, the interview that Filippo Biondi and Armando May had directly with Jay Anderson over our Project Unity channel. I watched that interview in its entirety. It's the one interview where Armando May actually did say that he believes that the shafts underneath the pyramid are either used for structural support or for the production of energy, meaning electricity. So since that has been stated, which of course to me it's nonsense, but regardless, because they said that, and Armando May said that these monuments, the pyramids, do not belong to the Egyptian civilization, his words verbatim, then I think now that Zahi Hawass, Dr. Hawass, said, if they are confident, the Italians, they should contact me. Okay, now the Italians need to contact him because now he said it. And everything we've said so far has been, we wish that someone would allow them to dig, or maybe not them, but that someone would dig to double check if this is true. But this is our point of access now. Do I still think that he's going to say, yeah, okay, let's dig? Not necessarily. I don't think he's going to do it. But he opened a door. Whether he did it for the sake of argumentation now, I don't know. At the end of the day, this is Ed. Nothing is scripted here, right? But now he said it. So if the Italians, it's kind of weird to say it that way as an Italian, but whatever. If the Italians contact him, maybe even through Joe Rogan, since he said he's happy to mediate, and if they say, hey, we want to talk about this, then during this live interview between Dr. Hawass and at least Filippo Biondi and Armando May, if Malanga doesn't want to get involved, I don't know. But even if all three can be there, then they could say, no, we are confident this is real. And then he's going to say, no, it's all nonsense. And then what's the natural follow-up to that? Well, let's check it. Why don't you dig? Have a look. And then to that, we're going to have an actual response. So the official response is either going to be, no, I'm not going to allow you to dig because this is nonsense. And then that's going to fuel the whole cover-up theory. And at that point, I'm saying, well, sorry, man, but you're giving this to them because you could have done it. There are plenty of holes already. It's not like it's going to be a problem. Just have a look. He has robots, German robots that he has had built to. So he could do it. He could do it. So at that point, if he says no, then he's going to get a lot of backlash for it. So perhaps this could pressure him into saying, just to prove you wrong, use Italians, just to prove you wrong, I'm going to dig and I'm going to bring in the press and then we'll see what happens. I think that could be great for the public. We want to know.
That anyone should...
Well, we'll make sure that happens. But listen, if the stone is 20 feet thick, the solid stone at the base, that's correct, right? And you said Osiris shaft is 50 feet. That means it can see past 20 feet, right?
But how can
so it could see through the stone and see... what they're showing
but the Osiris
repeated over and over again
the Osiris shaft is open.
Right.
It's not covered to see.
I understand.
You can go and you see the Osiris shaft down.
Right.
Everyone can see it.
But the interior is not open. And
well, yeah, but if it's open, and in this case, again, I'm not a supporter of Dr. Hawass, but in this case, I do have to say the point is good. If it's open, then it's also possible that this signal that is sent from the two satellites, because remember, they are recording sound, they're recording vibration, we're working with sound here. So whether it works or not, and so it goes in, things vibrate, perhaps having access makes it easier. So whereas with what's underneath the pyramids, holes of Amenti, they say, it might be harder because there is the solid bedrock and then it would have to go underneath that and then there is the water table. So it's definitely too different and it's a lot deeper. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot, it's different. It is different. So in this case, I do see where Dr. Hawass is coming from.
The interior is
But
visible,
you can see the interior.
But you can't see it to the exact dimensions the way these tomographic images show it, right?
I don't know.
If they're using this technology to go 50 feet under the ground to get an accurate depiction of the Osiris shaft.
I am not a scientist.
I understand, but this is my question.
All
why
the
would
expertise.
Man, I hate that they speak over each other. I think sometimes, on one hand, of course, Joe is the owner of the show, so he needs to be able to ask his question because his job here is to pressure. It is to push, right? That's how it works. However, I wish that people that go as guests understood that if they speak over each other, it's going to be annoying for the public. No one, it's not going to be advantageous to your point because you're just going to seem rude at that point. So you've got nothing to gain. If you want to gain the support of the public and you want people to see things your way, then at least as a basis you need to be polite and respectful towards the host. And when the host is asking a question, you finish the question and then you give your answer. If the host doesn't allow you to finish your answer, then instead of trying to speak over the host, I think it would be good policy. In that case, you just ask, excuse me, but can I finish my point, please? And I think that way, it would be a lot better for all parties involved, us included. The problem with Dr. Hawass is that he's used to doing press conference. I think what he's used to, and this is why he's getting so angry at this point, is because he's not used to people disagreeing and just not accepting everything like it's the gospel. That's how it probably is in Egypt for him, because he's the big guy, he's the big shot, right? So he says how things are, and everyone listens, and that's it. But in this situation, it's not his natural environment, if you will. And so the fact that someone is pushing back, he doesn't like it, because he's not used to it.
Why would you dismiss it if you haven't looked under there?
Because I told you, it is not me who can dismiss this.
What does it say, Jimmy?
This is the link to the original article,
Yes.
I believe.
Mm-hmm.
There's their names.
2022, yeah.
The very first sentence says that
The
due to
problem
the
with
poor
it?
penetrating action of electromagnetic waves inside solid bodies, the capability to observe these distributed targets is precluded. And then they had to come up with an experimental. It says experimental results are estimated by processing the SAR images else. And so I think that's the disconnect I'm hearing.
Yeah, I don't understand the technology, but my question is, we know how spectacular the pyramids are. We know
Right.
how spectacular just the base of it, the fact that it's carved into solid rock. Why would you not think that maybe other spectacular things exist even
I am
below
not,
it?
I told you, I am not
That's science.
this type knows about the science. I consulted the team, the top in the world, from Japan, France, and Egypt.
Who are these people?
They are the scan pyramid team.
What's okay? The scan pyramid.
Yeah.
The ones that found
Exactly.
the chamber above.
And they are working with me. And we found many other things in the second pyramid and the third pyramid. And we published this.
Right.
We just published an article
I
last
understand.
week.
Using different
Then what I am
techniques, right?
saying, if these techniques that these two Italians
3.
are correct, the only people who really can tell you it's correct or not are the scan pyramid people.
Or you dig, sir. Because there is, I think it would be much better to dig. I'm just going to say this. I know people are like, Metron, why do you keep saying that? Because honestly, I really want to see. I really want to see.
Not me.
But the scan pyramid people, aren't they using different technology?
But they know about technology. They are the top scientists in the world. I have to believe them, not the two Italians.
Yeah.
And if the Italian
Are you being Italian phobic, sir? Huh? Is that it? Is it because we eat pasta and you eat, what does he eat? Couscous? Well, we eat couscous in Sicily. So how about we choose Sicilian scientists next time? So we have one food staple in common.
Italians are really correct, they could come to talk to us.
Okay.
Not me, me and others.
I will definitely try to connect you with
Yeah,
those people.
please.
Because I know that Graham Hancock and Brian Murarescu have been in contact with those people. And they're open-minded about it. They don't know what's going on down there, but these images are repeated over and over and over again.
Fine. But
It's fascinating either way.
Okay.
The repetition is what you need in this case. If we really want to go academic about this, like properly scientific about this, since what Filippo Biondi, which I believe is the point that Joe was trying to make in this case, which I do agree with this point. His point is, we understand that you've got already a scan team. They are the best in the world, and they're using a specific way of scanning the pyramids, and so they say this is impossible. But what Filippo Biondi has claimed, and the other two, is that they're using a new technique. So the real scientific way of approaching this is not to say, well, that's impossible, because, well, they say it's not impossible, you say it's impossible, but they say it's a new technique. So if it's a new technique, you need to see if it's something that you can replicate. You need to test it. Rather than just saying it's impossible, but then you're not, just because you understand a technique that is similar but different, doesn't work. It's not enough, because they claim it's a new technique. So it could be nonsense, but then we shouldn't just dismiss it and say, no, impossible. We should say, let's test it. Let's replicate it. Test the star technology onto something that is applicable and similar. Not the laboratori del Gran Sasso d'Italia, the laboratories that are inside the Massive in Italy, because that's a different environment. Test it into subterranean mines that go 2,000 meters under the ground, which we do absolutely have. Some even reach 4,000 meters under the ground, and they're already mapped the way I understand it. Test it there. Let's see if the mapping is equivalent, and then test it somewhere where we think there is a water table, and let's see if the water is indeed interacting and changing, affecting the measurements. Do that, test it, give us more examples that are replicable. And then once you have done that, if he still dismisses it, then yes, I'm going to start thinking this guy's covering it up. It's just no, because not necessarily because he's trying to cover up the reptilians, but simply because he's trying to cover up the control of something that he has access to. It could also be for political reasons. We don't know that, but it's possible that this guy, he doesn't look to me like a very open-minded individual, I'll be honest. He looks like someone who is like, I've been doing this for 57 years, I'm from Egypt, I tell you what's right and you listen to me. This is the feel that I get from this guy. I'll just be honest about it. So at that point, if the thing is being replicated and tested and it appears to work, then I think you should either look, right? You should either look down there, or you take a position that is political, which is, I'm the only one allowed, but at that point, we see your true colors. I think that's what you should do. Right. Okay, well, then that's my opinion. This was interesting when it comes to this situation. We'll see how it evolves, but I'm definitely going to continue to monitor. I'm definitely going to continue to monitor the situation and see if this debate happens, and if it does, I'll be reacting to it 100%. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the tools, shall we? Because this was one of the major items of discussion. And in fact, if you have watched the video just posted today, the very first thing that Zaki Hawass says is, oh, I know how the pyramids were built. And then Joe Rogan says, do you? And he says, yeah, I know what they did. And he says, I can show you. Come to Egypt, he says. There is this technique where a skilled workman will go on top of one of these blocks that are usually stones. Then he will draw with a pencil exact line of the middle in the weak spots of the block. And then Zaki Hawass said he will use an iron nail and a specialized hammer. And then he will hit it and the stone will cut in two. Now, I have seen this. I have seen this happen. I found videos for it. And it's true. That's something that skilled people can do, skilled workmen and stonemasons can do. To me, though, it was important to say that the nail was iron, because it doesn't matter if we date the pyramids to 5,000 years ago, to 10,000 years ago, or to 30,000 years ago. In either of these cases, was there iron? No iron. So iron should be out the question. If you're talking about how the pyramids were built, don't mention iron because it's pointless. What would they have had even if we dated 5,000 years ago? Because if we go to the dating of 10,000, 30,000, particularly 30,000, we are in the Paleolithic, so the only thing they would have had is not even metal, because remember, you have Bronze Age, Iron Age. Before the Bronze Age, you have the Chalcolithic, which is the Copper Age, right? Copper was discovered before bronze, which was discovered before iron. Technically, well, actually, okay, let me be technical so I don't miseducate. Iron was known even before the Iron Age, because iron initially was harvested from meteorite, which I think is phenomenal. It's fantastic. You know, when you read Conan, whether it be the game Conan Exile or in general, you have star metal. Iron for the ancients was exactly a metal coming from the sky, the cosmos indeed, because these were situations in which they found it first before they could even take it from actual ore. But the ability to melt it and work it, those type of furnaces that could reach those temperatures, only occurred in the Iron Age. But they knew about iron, and they had found it already. It's just that they couldn't work with it the same way they do once we reach the technology, they meaning mankind. But yeah, Chalcolithic is the Copper Age. So yeah, if the pyramids go back 30,000 years ago, they only have access to stone. Flint and whatnot. If it happened 5,000 years ago, as we think, then yeah, they would have had copper tools. But can you use a copper nail to achieve the same thing is what I would want to discuss, is what I would have asked him if I was the interviewer. Because yeah, you're mentioning that, and then later on, I kind of doubt it because the copper is quite soft. I think it's going to bend, but it's just me. I haven't tested it. I'm just speculating. I don't know what you guys think. If any of you is a smith or someone who's used to working metals, that do let me know if that's what you think as well. And then later on, he speaks about tools that were of stone, but this stone, he says, and I think this was a language barrier, the stone in question was very sharp. This is why it could have been used to cut the stone that is used to build as a building material or a resource. Did he mean sharp though? Because sharp, so if a stone is sharp, it can break, right? So maybe he meant hard. So because if you think about it, that's what we did for the entirety of prehistory. When you have flint knappers, the act of knapping is take a harder stone and use it to crack flakes out of softer stone that then can be turned into a tool. For instance, flint. It's a fantastic stone to do that. With the way it shakes, it breaks into predictable flakes if you're skilled. And of course, if that's what you've been doing for generations, you are skilled. And I don't know if that's what he meant. The mainstream view is that during the Stone Age, men were mostly hunter-gatherers, and scavenging would have been considered the main pattern of subsistence behavior. And that would have been the case both in the Middle and Upper Paleolithic in Europe, but also more appropriately for this discussion in the late African Stone Age, suggesting also a very early start of hunting. Quarrying and manufacturing of stone, including flint, would have been a multi-generational endeavor, typical of organized ancient human settlements, and in fact at the very core of tribal societal organization. Now, whether they could produce stone tools so efficient to be able to build a pyramid made of over 1 million blocks is really the, shall we say, $1 million question here. So Maramane says they can use copper to cut stone. I think that the current accepted method is that they use wires and a hard sand-like material like we use diamonds today. So that's an interesting theory. I wish that they would replicate it because I want to see it. How long would it take? How much? Because the time component as well has to be considered. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. Okay, so slight topics. I kind of want to share this because this is interesting. The orange. I work with copper almost every day. I believe it's impossible. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. So we'll have to see if this wire technique works because again, as we see, I do think that if you're trying to use a nail, it's going to bend. But then again, that's something that would have to be tested before. Because I know sometimes we think something is impossible and then maybe it's not, depending on the technique used. But I agree. I don't think that you could use copper tools that way. The wire idea, that could be interesting to see. Yeah, copper is quite soft. Absolutely. Copper is soft. Totally. Even iron is soft, to be honest with you. But then again, if it's wrought iron, because oftentimes in history, even when the Romans used the term ferrum, sometimes they use a separate term for steel, but other times they do say ferrum, but it might still be technically classified as a mild steel or low carbon, depending. So it's even the nomenclature can get a little confusing when it comes to what is steel, what is iron, because the Romans absolutely had access to steel, and sometimes some blades, even in the Etruscan sense, are steel. They are steel. So when we say that they're using an iron nail, it is also possible that it was some kind of low carbon steel. That's also possible. We'll have to review, but steel has been around for a very long time. It is not a modern thing. And once I almost had I had a very animated disagreement with a cousin of mine because he kept insisting, no, the Romans couldn't have possibly access to steel. And that's unfortunately a little ignorance on his part because the Romans absolutely had access to steel. Medieval people obviously were using it and testing all sorts of different types of steel, and they knew how to normalize the steel. They knew how to apply heat treatment. Sometimes they even made mistakes and made we have sets of armor that are high carbon steel. A high carbon steel is great for swords. It's not great for armors. Medium carbon steel usually is best, but we know that they were testing. They were constantly experimenting, and sometimes even if you don't have access to the actual molecules, don't underestimate experiential knowledge. You may not understand what's going on in there exactly from a scientific standpoint, but you can still, with a lot of experience, understand what works and what doesn't. And so there is that. But the Romans and the Etruscans, even before the Romans, 100% had access to steel. It's just that the modern type of steel that we use, whether it be steel with the addition of chromium or whether it be, modern steel, which is a lot more homogeneous, of course, if you compare it to medieval steel already, and ancient steel, it's a different variety. But what's modern is the mass production of steel in the industrial sector. That's modern. And I think people confuse that, the mass industrialization of steel for like railway and all other applications. That's what people confuse with ancient steel, which still was a thing. Maybe archaeologists in 2,000 years will give us they'll call us something like that. Who knows? I mean, usually we say the information age at one point when they have the burst of the internet, rise of computer and technology, how it changes and we interact with it and all that. I guess that's a good name for it, but who knows? I mean, think about it for a second. And this is something it blew my mind when I thought about it the first time many years ago. But people in the medieval period didn't consider themselves to be medieval, and they did not consider that time to be the Middle Ages, because they weren't in the middle of anything. They were in the present. So from the point of view of medieval people, yeah, they could have considered the Romans, like, yeah, that's the Roman age. For them, there is a disconnection between the Romans and themselves. The Romans are the past. In fact, to a medieval person, first century Rome is a similar distance than there is between us and a person in the Middle Ages. It's 1,000 years of difference. That's kind of crazy as well if you think about it. Yet, we call it Middle Ages because they're in the middle between classical antiquity and our time today. But it's only perspective, which means in 2,000 years from now, we might be medieval to the future generations that will be studying. And maybe they will change it. At that point, we are medieval people. We could be. So to a medieval person, they're from the present. And that's something that is obvious, but you've got to kind of sit down for a moment and think about it. It's one of those things. Another similar situation like this that I always find fascinating is the fact that even if we were not to accept the alternative dating of the Giza Plateau and the pyramids at 10,000, 30,000, whatever the heck, 1,000 years ago, even if we just stick to 4,500 years ago, so the current accepted dating, still Cleopatra, as I mentioned before, would be closer to the invention of the iPhone that she was to the building of the first pyramid, even in that situation, which means that the ancient Egypt was already ancient in ancient Egypt. The misinformation age, 100%. Do you think it was obsidian? No, Benjamin, I wouldn't think so, because obsidian is a fascinating stone. I have a video dedicated on everything, guys. 1,200 video, 12 years on the platform. I have a video on obsidian, how it was used, for example, by the Aztecs, so the Mexica, as they refer to themselves. And it's great for arrow points. It's great for the kind of swords, if you want to call them. It's kind of a glorified club with stone cutting implements added to it, but whatever. It's good for cutting, and it can go down to the micro. With obsidian, you can get so sharp, it's insane. Like even sharper than a modern razor. You can get that level of sharpness, but the problem with stone, similarly to the problem with wood, is that these are materials that are not very durable. So if you cut multiple times, every time the friction, the impact will chip, and eventually it will be unusable, and you'll have to repair it, substitute sections. So I don't know if they use obsidian because of how sharp it is. It's good at cutting through human tissue or animal muscle tissue, but it's not great for smacking it against a rock because it's going to get broken. That's the way I see it with the studies I've done on obsidian. I love obsidian mostly because it looks great and you see it in video games, so I kind of got interested in it, if you know what I mean. I'm not sure it would be great for this specific application. As I say, it's good for arrowheads. Method on my sources says obsidian can get down to 10 molecules thick. Yeah, exactly, Sondre. I didn't remember the exact thickness, but I do know that it's insane. I do know it's insane. How crazy, like, thin obsidian can get is insane. Really is. Would you accept an invitation from Joe Rogan to show up on his podcast, asks me Samuel27? Well, of course. I just don't think I'm relevant enough. I think there are other people that should be invited before me. But if it ever did happen and he wanted to talk about, what would he talk about with me? Maybe the idea of searching the truth, or the idea of how to try to be as unbiased as possible. There are a lot of topics that we could discuss, I guess. I just don't think I could offer as much as other guests that have been invited, and likewise, I personally don't think that I'm that famous. Yeah, I've got a channel, a following, but anyways, anyone who invites me, I'd go. Anyone. Of course, thank you very much for watching. I will be reacting to the new episode put forth by Joe Rogan where he interviews Filippo Biondi, so look forward to that, and thank you for watching.